Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Brilliant Stars, make sure you go ahead and check out the Poketown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, myself and Jack are going to be going over all of the best and most interesting cards of our Astral Radiance set coming in just a couple weeks' time. This set is a really important one because we have a couple of regionals, but most notably, the NAIC is going to be Astral Radiance. So some people want to get their testing in as quickly as possible because there really are some great cards in this set to go over.
Yeah, and as usual, we have the regular card racing system. Feel free to pause right now if you want to see a bit more of a breakdown. We've also got the community ratings back as well. Thanks so much to everyone who got involved with those. The other thing to note is this is also the format for the team challenge from what we know as well. So even if you aren't going to one of the regionals, make sure you keep an eye on some of these cards because they could be important for that tournament coming up soon. So yeah, cracking on with the trainers. First things first, we have Adaman, who is a new supporter card. Adaman says, discard 2 metal energy from hand. If you do, search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So this is a metal reprint of Crash Awake. Unfortunately, Crash Awake saw almost no play. I think it saw niche play here and there, but realistically, saw pretty much no play. We have Metal Saucer, but at the time, Crash Awake also had Aqua Patch. So these are very, very comparable cards. Admittedly, there are some cool metal Pokemon in this set. There's some new build-arounds, and we already have a pretty good core for metal Pokemon. We have Bronzongization, as well as Saucer, and then, like I say, the Dialga V is another potential build-around. But just in general, Adaman is a pretty weak supporter. It's more of a combo piece, and whilst you like a lot of these metal energy in the discard pile because of Saucer and things like that, and we have Training Court Retrieval to get them back, realistically, it's still sometimes quite difficult to get both the metal energy in your hand to be able to actually pull off this combo. Admittedly, Dialga itself looks like quite a combo deck, so it kind of fits that whole combo nature of this archetype. But realistically, we think from our early testing of Dialga, there's other ways that you can achieve this Chrono Star sort of big V-Star power than Adaman. Adaman is just a little bit too slow, and realistically, unless you're using Adaman to then use Chrono Star, which means you have to, you're not able to boss, you're having to weave in weird things like cross switches, which you really don't want to be playing, that kind of stuff. The whole combo pieces can be manied out of your hand and that kind of thing. So yeah, Adaman in general, a nice combo enabler, but the deck it wants to be in the most is already such a combo heavy deck. It's actually just even more inconsistency that it's not really useful to play.
Next up we have Choi. It says that both players must reveal their hand, then you draw 3 cards. So getting some hand information is no bad thing. It's only a draw 3 though, so not super powerful. I think this literally just sits in that control category where having that hand information can be important enough for you to make use out of that information. It means that you can try and attack your opponent's hand in other ways, potentially Sydney on future turns, Galarian Berserker. There's also a new Luxray V that we'll talk about later today that can also try and attack the opponent's hand. That's really the only sort of combo potential with Choi. And at the worst case scenario, it's a draw 3, and we know that these controlling decks don't play many draw supporters. They normally look towards like Birdkeeper and a few other things here and there, so it does help extend the hand. But right now, I don't think there's really enough to warrant playing this Choi supporter card.
Next up, we have Silene. Silene, we've gone for a 3-star. It says flip 2 coins. For each heads, choose a card from your discard pile and put it on top of your deck in any order. So comparable to Roxanne. Roxanne lets you pick from a variety of different effects, but they shuffle into the deck. Silene, because they're going to the top, makes the cards more immediate. You're more able to access them more immediately in a lot of cases. We have new ways to draw cards. We have pre-built ways to draw cards. We have even things like Oranguru. Just swap the top card. That can be enough. So yeah, more accessible than the cards that you shuffle in with Roxanne for the most part. Which means, in general, we think Silene is a bit better than Roxanne. It's seen some success in a lot of Japanese Mew lists. Obviously, Power Tablets and Fusion Energy are very, very important resources that basically have no super nice way of being able to get them back. So Silene seems to have slotted in as a one-of in a lot of these decks, and we can see it for sure. Honestly, there'll be naturally some downturns where you're not looking to go for an Analysis Sparker because you don't have the energy left, or you don't need to boss or whatever. So these are the sort of the natural turns to happily Silene, get some resources back, and then again access them quite quickly, which is really nice. Other than that, there's not too many uses, but in general, it's just another nice recovery supporter card that we think is a bit more flexible than Roxanne. Admittedly, a little bit less reliable, arguably, because it's on a coin flip or 2 coin flips. But the flexibility of getting any card and almost always having access to it immediately, we think outweighs the benefits of the guaranteed recovery from Roxanne.
Next up, we have Gardenia's Vitality, a pretty important supporter to get to know because it is acceleration. The card allows you to draw 2 cards, then attach up to 2 grass energy from your hand to one of your benched Pokemon. So, although it has to be grass energy, it can be to any type of Pokemon target as long as it's on the bench. That little bench mention is a little bit awkward here and there. It means that you need to have some pivots naturally in your deck, but that's not something that you can't work around. And of course, attaching 2 grass energy is comparable to the old Welder supporter, which was attaching 2 fire energy. But here are some interesting targets for you to look at. There's going to be a Lilligant that we'll touch on later. There's already Shaman V-Star, and I think Zsuit V, a card that is super underappreciated right now in the format, has finally got some acceleration to really reach with that Jungle Rage attack. Could become much more powerful. There's already grass builds of Arceus around right now, using cards like Beedrill and even Flygon. They could really benefit from a card like Gardenia's Vitality. So I think there are going to be some fairly high-tier decks playing Gardenia, even if Arceus is playing just 1 or 2 copies. It gives you that same coverage that we see water builds of Arceus have with their one-of Melanie. Gardenia can slot right in doing a very similar role here, which I think is the kind of lowest floor option for Gardenia, but we already have great sort of energy recovery options as well. We have Retrieval, we have Court, we have Eldegoss with Cotton Lift. So there's a lot of ways you can get that grass energy into hand. We obviously have Pokegear as well, so it's not unlikely that we could see a similar style build to when we just had 4 Welder and lots of sort of search for Welder. We could go down that same avenue with Gardenia and having Luminion, Eldegoss, that sort of thing, trying to chain the supporter as often as possible. The only real downside is that draw 2 is admittedly worse than draw 3, obviously. The upside, I guess you could say, is that you get to draw the cards first. So, unlike when Welder is in a hand where you don't have energy, it's completely dead and you can't do anything, you end up passing. Gardenia is at least getting you that sort of panic inhaler option of getting two cards at the very least to try and get rolling. And some cases, you even get lucky and get grass energy off those 2 cards to also accelerate. So, there's ups and downs to the new text in Gardenia, but at the moment we're sort of limited on what we can use with the Gardenia, but I think what we have right now pushes it enough that there probably will be some interesting grass stuff. There's also some interesting grass weak Pokemon in this set as well, making it an important type in the metagame once again. So definitely one with a bag full of potential, could get even better as more and more sets get printed, of course. For now though, we feel like it sits pretty nicely at that 4-star.
Next up, we have Grant. This is a really, really interesting card. Admittedly, it's a lot of text. During your turn, during this turn, your fighting Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So just reading this part of the text alone will sort of look at this part of the text. It's basically a Leon, but just for fighting type Pokemon. Obviously, that's not great. Leon isn't seeing any play at all right now. And typically, fighting Pokemon are actually already doing enough damage in general. A lot of the build-arounds of fighting types lean into doing a lot of damage, so sometimes you don't need this extra buff. Some of the more interesting targets we've put on the screen, maybe Rapid Strike Urshifu, or even Single Strike Urshifu, as well as the new Hisui and Decidueye that we will chat about later. But there's not huge amounts of targets for this, at least in this set. It looks like there might be some coming up in some future sets, but right now it's definitely a worse Leon, even in those fighting decks. However, it does have an additional sort of bit of text that says, during this turn, if you discard 2 cards from your hand, excluding any Grant, you may take this Grant from your discard pile, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So yeah, essentially this can be used as sort of a quote-unquote math fixer or hand fixer in terms of the numbers of cards in your hand to hopefully start to empty the hand out for things like Industrious Incisors on Barrel or Genesect Cross Fusion Strike. Obviously, it naturally lets you just bin off cards that you don't need anymore, that are trapped in your hand, that you can't get rid of. Admittedly, you have to put the Grant back in your hand, so you're technically only minusing 1. But minusing 1 is still great for these decks that really build around the barrel and stuff like that. We've actually seen Galarian Mouth, which does something kind of similar. Discards 2 cards from hand and then lets you search your deck for a Berserker. Obviously, if there's no Berserker in the deck, it's just straight up a -2 from hand. But that has to take up a bench slot. So we could potentially see Grant sort of seeing play here and there, especially in the barrel engines, maybe even some of these control engines where you're discarding some of the pieces you don't need for that specific matchup, where you're playing lots of one-offs that end up getting clogged in the hand, and you end up getting the Marnie back into them, that kind of thing. Just getting rid of all of these while still being able to use the barrel as a draw engine to get to the pieces you do need, which is very, very interesting. Admittedly, I think it's a really difficult card to evaluate because we've honestly never seen anything like this before. And I think one of the biggest, or some of the biggest, impact of this card will very much depend on some of the more niche rulings we find out about this when this is released in English and we get the compendium updates that we don't currently have. So yeah, that will definitely kind of make or break this card. But if you can use this as many times as you like to quote unquote -1 from your hand, it could be very, very strong for these barrel engines, and maybe even in certain instances Genesect engines. It's pretty good to just -1 whenever you want. Considering this doesn't count as your supporter effect for turn as well, we could potentially find that this is essentially just a constant -1 as long as you're happy discarding certain resources. So yeah, whilst the first effect isn't all that strong, though do keep an eye on this card for future, in particular for Hisuian Arcanine, which isn't in this set but is perfect synergy with this card. Right now, the damage doesn't matter too much, but there are some very, very interesting implications for the discard effect. So yeah, pending some rulings here and there, this could be a really, really interesting one-off in certain archetypes.
Next up, we have Irida, another fantastic supporter from the set. It allows you to search your deck for a water Pokemon and an item card and put them into your hand. So it's a spiritual reprint of Karina, which did the same thing, but for a fighting Pokemon instead of a water Pokemon. But man, we have some great water Pokemon in the format already. The Inteleon engine is everywhere right now, and that makes Irida a really good early game option. It lets you go ahead and get Ball Search, it lets you get a guaranteed Sobble, which is excellent. It carries through the mid game by helping you guarantee Drizzles and Inteleons. This is basically a double Shady Dealing in a supporter effect, and as we know, we can build our decks in a way where item cards essentially access us energy cards, Pokemon, as well as other items like here and there. So yeah, it's a phenomenal option. It has great early game synergy as well with certain things like VIP Pass, where we're happy to play that as a 1 count potentially, because you play so many Irida. You could essentially have like 5 copies of VIP Pass, right? But just have one of them, and the Iridas don't fall off as hard as VIP Passes do, which means you have good access to this upside in the opening turns, but no way as bad of a downside that you have. It also means you could work towards things like cross switches naturally, which I think is popular in Palkia decks from Japan right now. And there's even more interesting water Pokemon. Of course, Luminion's another great one to eye up for supporters on future turns. You can have attacking water Pokemon, Palkia being one of the most impressive ones from this set. And Ice Rider gets a small consistency buff as well. So this feels like an excellent supporter, especially because we're sort of rewriting how we look at water decks in general. Palkia V-Star really changes how Ice Rider and Palkia itself will function, where you don't need to be Melanieing every single turn of the game. Because of that Star Portal V-Star power, you'll have the option to use other supporters like this Irida instead, because you have your energy acceleration covered in other means, which is great. So we're giving this a very high rating because I can already see it being like a 1/2 count in Arceus potentially, and could be even higher in Palkia and Ice Rider decks. So looks very strong there. There's also great meme potential with getting things like Candy Ludicolo plays for a super effective Glasses deck, trying to hit for all sorts of weaknesses in one archetype, and could also be interesting in low counts, even in the Suicune deck. Obviously, Suicune probably more likely to rely on Melanie throughout the entire game, but just a 1 or 2 count of Irida could also get some great candy combos rolling. So really interesting card, great early turns, reasonable in the mid game as well. So just a great coverage all around, I think, for some archetypes. Spoilers, we've rated this very high because we are big fans of Palkia as well, but also just fits into Arc Intel already in the game.
Next up, we have Camado. Camado is another supporter card. Discard all cards from your hand except 1, and then draw 4 cards. You can't use this if this is the last card in your hand. So, yeah, reminds us of Peony. In general, it's you're keeping 1 combo piece, but hopefully drawing into the second. Typically, I actually think Peony is probably going to be better, just guaranteeing the 2 training cards you want, because typically you're pairing Peony with something like a Barrel or a Genesect engine. So that means you're going to get the 2 pieces you want, be able to use them, and then draw more cards than Camado itself anyway. So yeah, it's kind of a bit worse than Peony. It's very comparable to the old Professor Rowan, which is not a great sort of benchmark to sit at. So yeah, I think it's worse. The worst option for the decks that happen to play Peony in like a 1 count, a Mew here and there, or Whimsicott here and there, this, that, and the other. I think typically Peony will be played over Camado.
Next up, we have Roxanne. Amazing to see a card like this come back into our format. It's something that we've lacked for a long time. It's a disruption supporter that can affect your opponent's hand. Roxanne reads, you can only play this card if your opponent has 3 or less prize cards left. Both players shuffle their hands into their decks. You get to draw 6, your opponent draws 2. That is much, much more disruptive than our current option right now, which is a Marnie in those later stages, where your opponent, after drawing for turn, has 5 cards to play with. Now they'd only have 3, and it does mean that they could get some like Ultra Balls off to get Crobatting or Luminion or Eldegoss and that sort of thing, but it's significantly fewer cards to do anything with in the first place, which I think is huge. And this feels like, because it's early text, it's only live in the sort of mid-game and late game, you're probably only going to be playing 1 or 2 copies of Roxanne, but the way we build our decks right now in the game, that's not much of an issue. You can play happily just 1 copy, and you play Luminion and Eldegoss V, you can have access and reuse potential of this card, which is fantastic, and Inteleon Engine would also love a card like this, because at any point you can Shady Dealings, play that Roxanne, throw the opponent's hand size, their resources back into the deck. If you can combine this with a KO, or combining it with a Path to the Peak, can really turn a game on its head. And what's great is, of course, you can already be winning a prize race, and your opponent goes down to 3 prizes just to catch up, and you can still hit them with a Roxanne. So, yeah, you don't have to be like behind, like you would with maybe an N or something like that, or an Ace Trainer. You can just be racing, trading blows against one another, and still throw a Roxanne in the mix. And 6 cards, let me tell you, that's a really, really good deal for you. That's really going to set you up nicely to close out the game if you're keeping up in a race. So, yeah, it's a fantastic card. It's going to be great with engines that we have pre-existing in the game. I think it may also mean that we'll look towards other engines like Kricketune V or Barrel engines to protect ourselves against Roxanne. So I think just this card existing in the game changes our sort of deck composition and how we try and work towards the late game. Like, very often in the game right now, you're looking towards boss as your win condition. Well, Roxanning someone makes it very difficult to be able to pull off a boss win condition, because within those 3 cards, with your draw for turn included, you have to sometimes find an attacker, an energy, and a boss's orders. That would be a very specific hand. So maybe we have alternate avenues now, or more bench-sitting Pokemon that can help you top up cards so that you can get over the line. So yeah, really will be warping which decks are successful in the game. Looking at things like Arceus V-Star, where you can power up attackers ready for the next turn on the bench, is going to be important. Palkia can do a very similar thing and is an efficient attacker. I think these cards naturally will lend themselves to be very, very strong in the game, because it means after a Roxanne, they'll naturally have a board to play with. So really is game-changing. The dynamics of the TCG are greatly different from when we do and when we don't have comeback. Right now, it's all about racing, basically, and Roxanne puts a spanner in the works. So going to be really interesting to see where this card lands, even though it's just a 1/2 count in some decks, and some decks might choose to play this or like no copies of this whatsoever, because they choose to be the aggressor more often than not. So that's another dynamic to keep an eye out for in the format.
Next up, we have Zsuit. Zsuit is another supporter card that says draw until you have 1 more card in your hand than your opponent does. So this is a +1 on Battle Reporter that saw 0 play. This is a quote-unquote +1 on Copycat that sees 0 play. And even though it's just a +1, it's still not enough. We have way better ways to draw. And even in a format where we have lots of like draw engines on board, especially if Roxanne's coming into play, Zsuit is just not strong enough, unfortunately. So yeah, pretty pants card.
Onto some items then. We'll start off with cancelling Cologne. Your opponent's active Pokemon has no abilities until the end of this turn, including Pokemon that move to the active spot during this turn. So the idea is that on your turn, you can shut down some annoying walling abilities more often than not, so you can actually hit through these Pokemon, because of course it's only this turn, so that's yours, not your opponent's. So it's not anything like a Hex Maniac or anything like that. It's going to be just so you can hit through some sort of passive abilities, really. So allowing you to hit through the likes of Miltank, allowing you to hit through the likes of Duraludon, even with special energy attached, is going to be the name of the game for cancelling Cologne. Sometimes this is going to be an item card that's better served in your deck than having like a one prize attacking Pokemon to hit through Miltanks, non-V Pokemon. Sometimes your deck is going to be completely special energy focused, and you need a Cologne in here to be able to get through Duraludons. It could also serve some interesting purposes in the likes of Jolteon decks or Rapid Strike Urshifu decks, where you gust up a Manaphy, then play the Cologne, and then suddenly the Wave Veil is turned off, and you can either target 2 bench Pokemon or knock out the Manaphy and target a bench Pokemon on the same turn that Manaphy's still in play, and it retains tempo, which I think is pretty interesting. So there could be some niche pockets here and there for the card. We're still rating it fairly experimentally because, there are other avenues. You don't have to play the Cologne. Only certain decks, Inteleon engines could cherry pick this card out at the right time. Other engines just kind of have to draw into it, and that seems very awkward for you. Plus, if you are up against these annoying walling decks, is one Cologne just enough? It's one of those awkward things to weigh up. I think this is actually a really good moment to talk about Silene and how versatile this card is, because it gets back any card on those heads flips. It means that like one copy of Cologne plus like one copy of Silene and Palpad, for example, could mean that you have enough resources to get through awkward matchups, but then, in other matchups, the Silene can be recovering other things, and Palpad's just a generally reasonable card we see in the game. So I enjoy seeing this Cologne. It's a great card to have in the binder to protect us from some of these annoying decks, and it can keep these abilities in check here and there. But I think early on in the format, it will have very niche cases, and you really need to have a big argument as to playing this card over like other attacking Pokemon and other threats you can use.
Next up, we have Dark Patch returning to the TCG. This was originally released back in like 2012, 2013 sort of time, and it was crazy good then. And it's crazy good now. It's basically Dark-type Metal Saucer, which is quite funny to say, considering this was the OG sort of acceleration that was type-specific. And look at the pure amount of targets this has. Even, starting with some of the less good ones, we have things like Eternatus and like Sableye V, which are not seeing much play at the moment. They can naturally be, or are naturally a lot less worried about energy attachments per turn now anyway. We've got Malamar VMAX, which is seeing play right now with Arceus. Already has great acceleration, but now there's so much less reliance on, one, having that Arceus attack go off, but two, only getting one Malamar on the board. Now you can just get 2 Malamar on the board, happily just get 1 energy on both, and basically all of these attackers are live because you have some extra dark patches in your deck to help boost consistency. We have Gengar as well. Gengar can maybe even move away from a Houndoom engine, which arguably was one of the things that was holding it back, having to play 2 stage 1s. Now we can move towards a different engine with Gengar, and honestly, Gengar is a really, really strong card, so that could be pretty good. We have Galarian Moltres V, which is already seeing a lot of play, but now you can quite easily get a Moltres going in one turn. We already had Dire Flame Wings plus Attach, so it was only ever 1 energy away, and there are even decks that played Energy Switch to be able to use different ways to manipulate this Galarian Moltres' energy. You can just straight up get Galarian Moltres out on turn 1. Not realistically, it's not inconsistent either. We have a couple of other cards that help boost this as well. Then things like Hooper V. Hooper V is another fantastic card that hits great weaknesses, but has never really had the best acceleration. The best we've been able to do is sort of see it as a tech in Arceus, or a very, very niche tech in Mew, where you have to attach to it over 2 turns typically. Now it can be a threat basically any turn of the game. Hisuian Samurott and Darkrai, 2 brand new V-Star Pokemon that both attack for 2 energy, and both like being able to basically just be a threat as their V form on the bench with absolutely no energy on them, knowing that they can dish out a huge amount of damage sort of the turn after if you're able to find these dark patches. We'll chat about those cards a little bit more later, but as you can see, there's loads of different targets for this. There's loads of ways to get dark energy in the bin as well. Obviously, we have Research and Quick Ball, naturally cards that are going to go in these kinds of decks anyway, but Trekking Boots is a brand new card that's very similar to Acrobike that we'll chat about, but is another way to get dark energy into the discard pile, and it doesn't seem like it's a bad way to do it either, because Trekking Boots is a pretty strong card regardless. So yeah, we're very excited about Dark Patch. I don't think we know exactly the best home for Dark Patch, but that's just because there are so many homes for Dark Patch. it's a little bit difficult to work out which one it's best in. Reasonably, any of these decks could be seeing a lot more play because of Dark Patch. It's crazy how strong this acceleration is. I personally think leaning into Moltres is going to be one of the best things to do, just because the efficiency on that attack is crazy, especially when you can get it going from turn 1. But yeah, plenty of options for Dark Patch. Very exciting to see it come back. Definitely going to be a huge part of the format. And Dark in general is still a great type right now. Mew is seeing, admittedly, less and less play, but it's still very prevalent in the meta. And the best way to counter Mew right now is nothing but being Dark type. So yeah, very, very strong card, and looks to really bully Mew, to be honest, with all of these different archetypes that I think realistically would have a very strong Mew matchup.
Next up, we have a return of another item card. We have Energy Lotto, allowing you to look at the top 7 cards of your deck, reveal an energy you find there, and put it into your hand, then shuffle the other cards back into your deck. This obviously doesn't state basic energy, and that's kind of the big selling point. It can help you have some extra reach towards some impactful special energy cards. The reason why we're going to give this that 2-star nod, really, is that we know how important fusion energy is in Mew, and we know that obviously sometimes you're juggling trying to find the fusion energy first, that then unlocks your lesser sparkle, because of course if you sparkle first, you have far less odds of drawing into that third fusion energy to attach for a full power Melodious Echo. Energy Lotto can mean that you find a fusion energy earlier, or gives you another bailout option if you've already had to use the sparkle just to help with your sort of hand mapping, to still have a reasonable chance of getting a fusion energy, even if you don't hit heads on a Cramomatic. That's basically your alternative if you sparkle first, or if you just have the fusion in hand or whatever. So I think it's got the nod really for maybe being a one-of in Mew. If we think Mew still can survive in some way or another, it's still obviously very fast and consistent. But there are some other great special energies still in format. Of course, Capture Energy being a great one on those opening stages, Speed Lightning being a great consistency booster, Double Turbo. How great is it for Arceus to get that turn 1 going second Trinity Charge? I think that's obviously huge. If you're able to hit a Lotto as well, maybe it saves you a card on Starbirth here and there. So I think this is only ever going to be a bit part player, but I could foresee it being a one-of in possibly a Mew deck, and maybe other decks that are playing, 4 copies of Capture, 4 copies of Speed Lightning, that sort of thing. That's really where Energy Lotto is going to feel great as like a 1 or 2 count, really.
Next up, we have Featherball. Featherball is a item card that says search your deck for a Pokemon with 0 retreat cost, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So obviously, fairly niche targets, but there are some pretty key ones that it's worth keeping in mind. Obviously, both of the Mew, the V and the VMAX are 0 retreat cost Pokemon, so could definitely be teched in, similarly to the way Fog Crystal is. Maybe in the all special energy builds could be a nice one of in there. Really, really good card for Jolteon, to be honest. Jolteon, again, having the V and VMAX both be free retreaters, means that you're not spending Ultra Balls, Evo Incenses, that kind of thing, and you can save those for Inteleons. As well as some other niche uses here and there. We have Hisuian Sneasel V and Starmie V, both from this set, as well as Tapu Koko, which is often used as a pivot, or was often used as a pivot in some of these one prize archetypes back in the day. So yeah, it's not going to be the engine of any new deck realistically, because it's quite difficult. It's very hard for them to print 0 retreat cost Pokemon, but like naturally, because it's such an advantage already to have 0 retreat. So it feels like it's never going to be the engine, because we're going to struggle to see a completely free retreat cost deck. But it could be a nice 1 or 2 of in some of these decks here and there that do have these free retreating options, or a free retreating main attacker. So yeah, definitely want to try out. I think primarily in Jolteon over Mew, but yeah, maybe even try it as a 1 of in Mew here and there too.
Onto a Gutty Pickaxe, a really interesting item card, allowing you to reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a fighting energy, attach it to one of your benched Pokemon. Otherwise, reveal it to your opponent and put it into your hand. So yeah, either way, your opponent's seeing that card, but you can either pocket it in your hand, or you can put it straight into play, which is great. It is once again similar to the Cynthia's Ambition, just going to benched Pokemon, so Maybe a little bit of extra work there to actually get something attacking straight out the gate, but it does essentially get that extra energy in play from an item. So similar to Dark Patch, we've just gone on and on about how great item acceleration can be, because it means you can turbo out some earlier attacks, maybe even turn 1 going second. You can get some beat sticks rolling where you otherwise wouldn't think it possible. We have some good synergy here as well. We can, of course, change our top deck with a card with our from our hand with Primate Wisdom, so you can make sure that your Gutsy Pick is hitting a fighting energy if you want it to. But the great thing about Gutsy Pick is sometimes your hand just isn't that good. You can start firing off these pickaxes just to draw 1 here and there and get you out of panic spots. So I think that's very interesting. I feel like it is a little bit of helpful acceleration for fighting types here and there. Could be interesting with Rapid Strike Urshifu, actually. Of course, we've seen Melanie builds of Urshifu in the past, allowing you to get to a 3-energy rapid flow turn after turn. You can do something very similar here with Gutsy Pickaxe, and obviously you can play Tower of Waters to help move in and out of your Urshifu, that sort of thing. So we could be seeing a fighting energy and rapid energy build of Urshifu at last as well, because normally you're seeing it with like dark energies or water energies. So yeah, the Gutsy Pickaxe does change that sort of dynamic, and it means that you're not rigidly stuck to a Melanie. Now you can play other power supporters to keep digging through your deck and maybe be less vulnerable with your draw engine, which I think is very interesting. I think another card coming out from the set would be Hisuian Decidueye V-Star, which does require some extra acceleration to make sure you are using that Somersault Feathers every single turn as well. So at the moment, we're not given a huge amount of attacking threats. I think Urshifu would be the main one I want to start trying out with. But this is another great card to just have in mind. It's always going to be acceleration for fighting types going ahead, which is great. And let's not forget that some people live by playing a 56-card deck rather than a 60-card deck, and Gutsy Pickaxe sure does that for you. The only thing I would say is that we also have Trekking Boots that can do that, but better. So you're not revealing a card to your opponent for information, and the Trekking Boots can get rid of bad cards to dig even deeper into the deck. But that said, it means that now we can also play decks with just 52 cards, because you can play 4 Gutsy, 4 Trekking Boots, and really get digging. You get cycling through very quickly to get to the bottom of your deck. So that could also be a big signal for some controlling players. As we know, the Eldegoss Loop loves to get to the bottom of the deck as quickly as possible. Gutsy Pick could be played in decks that play no fighting energy whatsoever, just to be that cycle of 1. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at this pickaxe.
Next up, we have Hisuian Heavy Ball. Now, we've rated this one quite highly, but honestly, it does seem very, very strong. You look at your face-down prize cards, and you may reveal a basic Pokemon you find there and put it into your hand. And then you shuffle the Heavy Ball into your remaining prize cards. And if you don't see a basic Pokemon, it just goes to the discard pile. So naturally, you're kind of thinking, well, what's this really doing for me? It's not got sort of particularly high impact. But there are so many one-offs in decks that can make or break being able to function in specific matchups. Things like Manaphy against the Rapid Strike, or against the sniping decks. The new Radiant Pokemon, which we'll talk about shortly, that have incredibly powerful effects that are just worth grabbing. One of attacking options, things like Zapdos and Moltres, as well as just consistency boosters, things like one of Crobat, one of Luminion, one of Eldegoss that we see here and there. So all of these cards, whilst none of them in particular necessarily, well, a lot of them will sometimes make or break matchups. Other times they're just consistency boosts. But either way, a lot of the time it's just nice to be able to pick them out of the prizes, as well as immediately know what's in your prizes, a bit like a town map here and there, if you're able to see this before going for a deck search or anything like that. And sometimes in bad situations, it's just a Sobble, or it's another Arceus, or it's another Genesect, or stuff like that. So it's a really, really interesting one. Obviously, it can't get evolutions, which is a bit awkward, especially as we're moving quite heavily towards seemingly a V-Star meta where we're going to be playing a lot of these evolutions. But to be able to play the evolutions, you need to play the basic Pokemon. So yeah, it's a really, really nice one that we've added into a lot of our decks recently. Again, most decks will be looking to play one of these Radiant Pokemon. There's really not that many Radiant Pokemon or decks that can't make use of one of these Radiant Pokemon. So even just in the situations where that's prized, this Hisuian Heavy Ball can get value. Additionally, you have things like the Beedrill deck, the Pawniard deck, the Durant deck. All of these want as many of their respective Pokemon out onto the board as possible. And similarly, you've got some of these more meme options like the super effective Glasses deck that we'll chat about a little bit later on, where you have basically one of every single type of Pokemon and you need to hit that specific type for the specific weakness in that matchup. So yeah, whilst it all seems like very cute and very, oh, that'd be nice if I can grab that, we've found it actually to be quite consistent to do so. And a real lifesaver in certain instances, especially when things like Manaphy or Radiant Greninja are prized, because that can sometimes make or break a game. So yeah, it's definitely one that I think is easy to gloss over. And typically, I think when building a deck, it will be easy to just not include this. But we feel it's never going to be a massive detriment to include this, and it could have some real big upsides. So yeah, it might seem like a little bit of a high rating, but honestly, we do enjoy the flexibility of being able to, one, see the prizes, plus two, pick out specific key cards from the prize cards that help smooth out the game for the rest of the game. So yeah, very interesting one of, but one that we think could see play in pretty much any deck, to be honest.
Next up, we have Honey Pot. It allows you to choose one of your Pokemon, then flip a coin until you get tails. For each heads, heal 40 from that Pokemon. So it's like an Ice Pop. It doesn't have to be the active, which I guess is the only upside, but on a tails flip, this card does nothing, so that's very bad, and it's far less useful than hitting heads on a hammer or hitting heads on a catcher most of the time. So yeah, the heal 40, very minimal effect. We already have the Ice Pop, which is at least guaranteed a little bit of heal and can get extra value. The potion is more guaranteed heal. We have lots of ways to heal right now. There's even a stage 2 line that we'll look at later on in the video as well that has a little bit of extra healing that could help out certain decks. So yeah, really not that powerful of an effect. There is a Vespiquen that we'll talk about later, which has to target Honey Pot as its damage modifier, basically. But we feel like that's going to be a Mimi deck anyway.
Similarly, Spicy Seasoned Curry is another way of healing that we think is pretty pants. It heals 40 damage from your active Pokemon, and then burns your active Pokemon. The burn is kind of, so it's basically like a heal 20 with the way burn currently works, and you can already see we have guaranteed heal 20s that have upside right now. So yeah, very similarly to Honey Pot, it's just not good enough.
Next up, we have a Switch card. It's an item card that is basically Switch, but in decks where you only play basic Pokemon, this is actually a strict upgrade. Because if you switch your active basic with one of your benched, you can heal 30 from the Pokemon you move to your bench. And I do think there is enough pure basic decks in the format that one of these is going to end up being at least mid-tier. So we're going to rate this that 3-star because it is strictly better than Switch in these sorts of archetypes. And that heal is actually low-key relevant. And one of the main reasons why I'm scared right now to play a heavy Mysterious Tail Mew engine in the format is that it gets bullied often by Inteleon engines because they can just quick shooting you down and take a free prize here or there. But the Switch cart actually heals off that damage that you're getting hit by Inteleon, so it can save you from getting hit by Yoga Loops and getting free prizes taken by quick shooting here and there. So I think Switch cart is really good in this all basic approach, essentially, where you just play Mew, probably like Crobat and Lumineon, those sorts of cards, and then you just play your basic attacking Mons. The main reason I mentioned pivoting so much is that a lot of the things we are trying to attack within the format are going to rely on Basin, which is from the bench, Gardenia's Vitality from the bench, even Pickaxes from the bench, Dark Patch also from the bench. So there's a lot of reason to have Switch cards in general in these sorts of decks, and why not let it be a Switch cart as a direct upgrade? You know, even some of these Pokemon damage themselves. The Basin is damaging Entei, the Galarian Moltres V is damaging itself, and if the opponent chooses to go around your sorts of Pokemon or whatever, you can end up tanking with these guys. So why not get extra bits of heal here and there? I believe that there's enough benefit to like a pure Moltres deck. Specifically, I think that's going to be very strong. And I certainly want to experiment again with the fire stuff now that we have Radiant Heatran. I want to experiment with the grass stuff with Gardenia's Vitality now. There's a Jirachi V as well, which is interesting for some sort of toolbox of different types of Pokemon where you can retain some energy here and there. And I feel like at least one of these has to end up being good enough. And this is strictly an upgrade to Switch in those all basic decks.
Next up, we have Trekking Boots, a card I alluded to earlier on that says, look at the top card of your deck, you may put that card as your hand or discard it and draw one card. So it's not really an upgrade on Acrobike or a downgrade, it's like a side grade on Acrobike. It just does something slightly different. You always get to draw a card, and you get to draw arguably, hopefully, the best of two cards with Acrobike, whereas with this, you always get to draw a card, and whilst you don't always get to draw the best of two cards, you sometimes get to draw just one card and not have to discard the additional card to get a card you want. So, like I say, kind of a side grade, not really an upgrade or a downgrade, but still a great card to have. It's fantastic for a lot of these turbo engines. We mentioned the Pickaxe earlier on. Trekking Boots is another great turbo card for just filling the deck with less cards that do stuff, but cards that get you to the cards that do stuff is really, really important. Being able to find these battle VIP passes and stuff like that, Cramomatics, all of this stuff all of these like turbo style cards that are all great, but we don't really have a great turbo engine right now. The best one is Mew, which has to play Cramomatics, and it's only good because not because of the items in the deck, but because of the Genesect engine drawing into the items in the deck. So now we can realistically see these item turbo engines maybe being a variety of different decks, which is pretty good. Obviously, there's additional synergy with discarding cards. Metal Saucer, Dark Patch, Melanie all want their specific energy in the bin, which is great because it means that you get to draw an additional card as well as prepare your Saucer, Patch, or Melanie to have greater value as well as just naturally drawing more cards. Typically, the best decks in the format or the best decks in the game are the ones that draw the most cards and have access to the most options. So yeah, it's a fantastic card. Realistically, it can go in pretty much anything. We think it lends itself to some of these turbo decks more so. But there's been successful lists of a lot of different decks playing this. I think some of the only decks that realistically probably wouldn't want to play this, especially in a high count, are some of these sort of Inteleon decks that naturally tutor the cards they want out of the deck. But this alone, like Inteleon's been a huge part of our format over the past couple of years, and this card alone could move us away from that. It could mean some of these decks look to be built differently now, and look to be built on more of a turbo engine to not have to wait until the Drizzile is active or wait an extra turn until they can evolve into the Inteleon. Now you can just do it all as early as you find the boots and get going. So yeah, I really encourage you to experiment around with some of your favorite decks with this engine because it could breathe them a new lease of life and kind of ramp up the speed of them. Especially in, as Joe mentioned, with the Switch car, a lot of these all basic sort of 2-prize decks we think really can benefit from a card like Boots because a lot of them really benefit from turboing into the deck and finding the combo, that kind of thing. So yeah, Trekking Boots, fantastic card. We're really looking forward to seeing how it sort of changes the way decks are built going forward.
Next up, we have Turbostall, a lot less interesting. You can only use this card if you go second and on your first turn. Search your deck for a basic energy and attach it to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck and your turn ends. So think of it like a Greening Cells from a Leafeon V, but it's much harder to find this Turbostall card, unfortunately, unlike a Leafeon, which is easy to go ahead and grab. There's obviously upsides of it being an item instead, but yeah, like if you go second, there's a couple of things we can use to tutor out this card, like Irida or Peony, that sort of thing. There's also a Hisuian Voltorb that does a very similar thing as well in this set. It's a 0 energy attack that can go ahead and grab 2 energy, actually, not just 1. So it's an upgrade on Leafeon and Turbostall in some regards, as long as you can get this boy active. So a little bit of acceleration here and there. I mean, it's something, but it's so awkward. It's never good to go second in the first place. It does give you a bit of relief here or there where you can turn attach to one thing and turbo stall to something else. One of those sorts of options. But yeah, it's slow and it's difficult to piece together. You never really want to play more than one copy of this, but you want to have enough tutor to get it out in the first place. So probably just never going to see the light of day.
Next up, we have Unidentified Fossil, another reprint that unfortunately hasn't been spruced up. The fossil mechanic has been pretty weak for the past few years. Admittedly, it did see a little bit of niche play in the Sun and Moon era, but Unidentified Fossil is just a basic colorless Pokemon that you play down as an item instead of a basic Pokemon. It can't retreat. You can discard it at any time. Yeah, it's harder to find than a Pokemon. There's no great benefit in playing Bastiodon or Rampardos. None of these Pokemon are particularly strong, and whilst they have very flashy effects, they're stage 2s with even an additional downside of being part of the Unidentified Fossil mechanic. So yeah, unfortunately, they're just weak stage 2s hindered by a bad mechanic. So yeah, just not going to be going anywhere, unfortunately.
Next up, we have the only tool in the set. It's going to be Super Effective Glasses. When the Pokemon this card is attached to does damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, that damage is affected by weakness. The weakness is ×3 instead. So, oh boy, you can make some wonky things happen. It looks like the damage threshold that you need to hit now is like 110 to knock out VMAXs and even less to knock out V-Stars. So with these glasses, it sometimes can be an upgrade to like a choice belt, for example, to help you reach when you are trying to capitalize on certain types in the format, and sort of if they become popular enough, can you just counter them with a mini toolbox? And I think that's really where we're going to see things happen. The Ludicolo has been on far too many slides already in this video, seeing as though it's certainly a meme deck. But the glasses actually means that if you can enthusiastic dance, even like 10 or 20 damage is enough with the glasses to knock out some stuff. So we can play a myriad of very bad attackers and actually get huge uptrades, which I think is going to be content if nothing else. I think possibly a bit more worth exploring is going to be Zoro boxes. I think you just, once again, your card pool is expanding all the time with Zoroark, with various stage 1s, and some of the ones we may have written off previously because they don't hit enough. Now you can glasses up and actually reach numbers that you'd like to on certain weaknesses. So there could be times where the glasses is a pure upgrade to the choice belt, and that's something that we need to really look out for in Zoro box, because Zoro is certainly interesting, and there's even more stage 1s coming out in this set. You'll see Zoroark on a few slides later down the line because he's getting more and more enticing. I think that's where, if ever, we're going to get a home for super effective glasses. But it could end up that Belt is just a crazy card anyway, and that's going to be the preferred choice.
Next up, we have Gatejawborg, a stadium card that says whenever either player plays a basic Pokemon from their hand onto their bench, they place 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. So naturally, kind of thinking about some cards that would maybe benefit from this normally. In the current format of Dragapult and Jolteon, neither of these are particularly strong. Dragapult is pretty non-existent, but Jolteon has seen a little bit of play here and there. But in general is a bit weaker than it has been before. But there are a couple of cards that definitely synergize in this set with the Gatejawborg. Primarily Hisuian, Samurott, V-Star, and Bisharp. Hisuian Samurott does 110 plus an extra 110 if your opponent is already damaged. So that means that you don't have to rely on things like Zigzagoons or Inteleon Pings maybe. And instead the Gatejawborg is helping you push for that extra damage. 220 plus 20 is 240. Plus the damage from probably a choice belt, realistically, that's 270. That's a pretty good number to be hitting for 2 energy. Spoilers, we are quite excited about Hisuian Samurott anyway. It's not because of Gatejawborg, but it's another option for the deck. Similarly, Bisharp, if anyone has any memories of the old Ancient Origins Gyarados, this is a very, very similar Pokemon that does more damage based on the amount of damage counters on your benched Pawniard, which looks to be not super top tier, but at least, at least content, probably, mid-tier competitive maybe. A nice one prize option at least, if nothing else. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I think in general this card is likely to still be quite hard to find here and there, but it's one that we can maybe help draw towards with things like the Trekking Boots engine. Trekking Boots naturally synergizes well with Dark Patch, which synergizes well with Hisuian Samurott. So you can kind of see this package they've kind of fed to us here. Whether it will turn out to be fitting everything together, or whether it'll be a little bit too clunky and there'll be better ways to play Samurott, we'll have to wait and see. But we have seen these stadiums do well in the past, even in situations where the sort of 20 damage has helped on either side, whether helping you for the Bisharp or helping you for the Samurott's damage. We've seen both of those things happen with Team Magma's secret base back in the day. So yeah, it could see play. We think it's pretty nice, or at least an option for the Samurott deck, and it's basically integral to the Bisharp deck, so we think it's going to be a 3.
Next up we have Jubilife Village. It allows you to shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5 cards if you do your turn ends. So it's similar to Tropical Beach. I think that's one of the closest things you can look towards in terms of a stadium, this sort of effect. Shuffling and drawing 5 is not bad. Of course, a lot of the time you play out your hand on those opening turns and leave your hand with less than 5 cards. So this can be a reasonable card. The one thing I will say is that we already have some great end-of-turn effects in the game. We have Gormandides with Snorlax, which is exactly Beach, and we have Zacian V, which is Intrepid Sorting and drawing 3, so it's sort of unrestricted in how large your hand size can grow, and you can still get this. So I don't actually think it's that good for like controlling decks. Tropical Beach wasn't just for control, it was just for sort of slower archetypes in general that don't really look to attack in the opening turns. We don't have many of those in the format. Yes, we have some evolving V-Stars that don't attack exactly on their first turn or whatever, but even then, a Shuffle 5 isn't that crazy strong. Like, I often get nervous about moneying myself to just those 5 cards, so the Shuffle 5 can be risky at times, and especially with the engines we have in the game, with Inteleon, where you're just looking at your hand and knowing exactly what pieces you're going to go ahead and grab the following turn. It just really doesn't play towards the playstyle of many engines in the game. So I feel like this is actually low-key quite a weak card. There's not many spots for it. I think we have better end-of-turn effects if you are going to be a control player, and otherwise you're just going to be attacking. So maybe just as exactly as Stadium Bounce, you don't have anything better to play. You want to, have something where your opponent can't benefit much from it either, unlike things like Training Court right now, where sometimes it's your preferred stadium, but it helps the opponent out at the same time. Jubilife can be slightly different in that sense, where it's good for you and is always a bounce, but rarely helps the opponent. So maybe there's that going for you, but otherwise I don't think this is going to see much play.
So we have Temple of Sinnoh. Temple of Sinnoh is a 4-star card, and we think each special energy attached to a Pokemon in play provides colorless energy and has no other effect. So it's essentially the Dusk Noir from, I want to say Chilling Rain, I believe it was. That ability that was seen here and there, and that was a stage 2. This is now an insta-play stadium card. Admittedly, it can be bounced, can be turned off, this, that, and the other, but more importantly, this can be used as a proactive option rather than a reactive option and a defensive option, like the Dusk Noir was. So one of the biggest uses for this is actually going to be dealing with Fusion Strike energy. Obviously, as well as just being broken in general, Fusion Strike energy also stops any abilities affecting the Fusion Strike Pokemon it's attached to. So this is going to allow things to be put into range with Quick Shooting, with Mooncutting Star, or even just setting up the damage to be able to attack a Mew with Merciless Blade for the KO. Already a very consistent attack. Huge tempo swing. So yeah, that's one of the biggest uses. Naturally can be used just as a one-off as well, because that kind of tempo swing can be enough to just win in a situation, in a sort of a board state like that anyway. So it's not something you have to play a huge amount of to be able to get benefit from. It can just be used on the right turn, especially in sort of an engine where you just need that big tempo swing and you're good to go. As well as that, it can turn off things like Double Turbo Energy and Spiral Energy, both of which are, or at least Double Turbo is a huge energy in the format right now, but Spiral Energy also used here and there, especially in the Rapid Strike Melee deck, meaning that the Spiral Energy just doesn't work for the Rapid Strike Melee anymore. It's just a colorless energy. They can't attack with it. Double Turbo Energy, they're reduced down to like 1 less energy on their Arceus, for example, which means they have to attach more into that Arceus, which is pretty good. Admittedly, again, they can quite easily bump the stadium, this, that, and the other, but it's really good just to be able to at least give yourself a bit of a breather, especially in decks that aren't playing any special energy themselves, or are able to set up attackers that are not using special energy. The one that we're thinking of the most is Palkia. This is definitely a really nice one-of, maybe even a two-of in Palkia, alongside Path of the Peak, so there are multiple avenues that you're able to maybe go into, especially if you want to be able to bounce that path that you're playing to be able to have access to Star Portal. You're going to need another Stadium Bounce anyway, so having different ways to deal with these different matchups, all of which are a bit inconvenient for your opponent and basically non-existent for you, is going to be really nice. So yeah, it's another nice temple. It's another nice stadium, this temple. It's not anywhere near as sort of game-breaking as kind of Path of the Peak when it shuts off all abilities or anything like that, but just buying you a turn, being able to give you a breather, as well as having the additional upside of being a pretty good counter to Fusion Strike energy, we think this is a really nice card to have in the format.
So, quick summary of all the things we've talked about so far. Let's jump into those Pokemon, starting off with Beedrill V, starting off with the grass types. This is a 210 hit point basic with 1 retreat cost. It has 2 attacks. The first is Twin Needle for 1 grass, and it flips 2 coins. You do 40x the number of heads. And it also has Swarming Sting, kind of the main threat here. For grass, colorless, you do 50 times the number of Beedrill V you have in play to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So really, I think the only way you can ever try and make this work is obviously with Gardenia to accelerate to the guy and try and have a turbo engine where possibly it's your first attack of the game, you've gone second, you try and Swarming Sting with the full suite of Beedrills, you get a Telescopic on, and it's similar to getting like a boss KO on something. Think about how Meloetta with Pokemon catchers recently in Mew has been backbreaking to opponents, where you get that head slip on the catcher and you get the Melodious Echo KO. In some worlds, Beedrill gets that big Swarming Sting with 4 in play plus like a Telescopic or a Zig Ping or something like that to take a 2-prize KO, and maybe that tempo alone wins you the game. if that tempo alone doesn't win you the game, I don't think you're ever winning any other game, because Swarming Sting, that 200 is a really annoying number. You need to play a mixture of telescopics and choice belts, probably, so you can still be hitting things into the active position. I guess because you're doing this spread approach, you don't need to play Boss's Orders, but let's be honest, everyone's going to play Manaphy anyway. We're still assuming that Urshifu is going to be powerful. I think the only reason why Urshi could be less prevalent in this format is because Dark Patch plus Hooper V is a really good check to Urshi. As we've already seen, it's already problematic that Hooper V is coming into Arc decks. So maybe there's less Manaphy in the meta, thanks to the help of Hooper V. But I still think there's going to be too much for a Swarming Sting Beedrill deck to work. But I do think you could get some wins just from having really crazy powerful turn one going second plays where you just prey on weak starts. But if that's all you're doing, it's going to be awkward. There could be other decks that are tempo based themselves, which means that if they've gone first, even without the help of a supporter, they've probably got well developed and can respond on a Beedrill throughout the game. But yeah, pretty spicy, and is certainly, I'm like terrified if someone flips over a Beedrill against me and I'm the player going first. Outside of that, I don't think it's going to be much of a problem.
Next up, we have Hisuian Lilligant V-Star. This is the first V-Star of the set. And Hisuian Lilligant V is a pretty cool Pokemon, starting kicking things off with 200 HP and a free attack in Dance, which lets you draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. Really nice early game setup. Admittedly, it means leaving a 2-prizer in the active, but honestly, just being able to help build your hand back up is never a bad thing, especially when you want to be spending a lot of ball search to build your board up. And then Leaf Step does 130 as well, not too relevant. The V-Star, however, 260 HP, which is pretty good, evolves from the Lilligant V, of course. Has the parallel spin attack for 130 for 3 energy, and you may return an energy card from your hand. From this to your hand, and if you do, it does 100 more damage. So that's 230 with for 3 energy if you return the energy, which isn't a bad thing with Gardenia's Vitality because it means that you can Gardenia to the bench one should this one get KO'd, or just attach this straight back on, which is nice. 260 with a choice belt, pretty nice, and then Flapple pings or Inteleon pings pushing up to 280, reaching that all-important number for things like Arceus V-Star. So yeah, not bad numbers. Obviously, like I mentioned, we have Gardenia's Vitality to be able to help power this up in the early turns. You can even use Eldegoss in that kind of deck to be able to bin off, play heavy Gardenias, but still play high counts of things like Professor's Research and all of the Ball Search cards, happily bin them off early and then Eldegoss for them later on, which is pretty cool. You can also use Capture Energy in this deck, and it has a really nice synergy because you can parallel spin the Capture back into your hand and kind of double dip on that Capture Energy effect, be able to grab another Sobble or grab another one of these basic Pokemon that you might be playing, and help consistently carry on building up your board up, which is pretty cool. So yeah, you have the option to pick up the Grass Energy or the Capture Energy and just do whatever you see fit in terms of how you want to further progress your board state. There's lots of ways you can play this deck. If you wanted to build around the Star Perfume V-Star power, that's that's the way that we've played the deck the most so far. The V-Star power says once during a turn, you may search your deck for up to 5 in any combination of Grass, Pokemon, and energy cards. And Grass energy cards, reveal them, put them into your hands. So that can be really good for setting up Gardenia's Vitality, also grabbing that Eldegoss, like I say, but also just grabbing lots of basic Pokemon, being able to grab extra Hisuian Lilligants, maybe extra Applins, extra Gossifleurs, Kricketot, all of these different grass Pokemon that you can play that kind of have niche uses here and there. You can get them out a bit more consistently than maybe you would be able to in other instances. So yeah, definitely some really interesting stuff. You can also pair it with Shaman V-Star. The Shaman V-Star's ability isn't particularly strong, so you're pretty happy still using Star Perfume, but you can also use Revenge Blast on Shaman, which is definitely a far better attack now that we can Gardenia to it because we have way better acceleration, and it can be a fantastic late game sweeper now. So yeah, lots of really interesting options for Hisuian Lilligant. We still think it's a little bit weak just because it requires a lot of pieces, but I think at least in this sort of grass build that we've played, it's trying to do a lot, but when it pulls off all of these different bits and bobs that it can do, it can be really powerful. We'll get to the Kricketune shortly, but the Kricketune also increases its HP to 300, which means it's a 2-prize 300 HP Pokemon, which is pretty intimidating because that's before even adding on tools like Big Charm and stuff. So it can be 330 if you wanted it to be, which is pretty gross. Admittedly, Fire looks to be a little bit better. There's more reason to play Fire in this set for sure. There's a couple of additions it gets. So that could be a little bit scary. But I do seriously think Hisuian Lilligant has some potential, at least to be a mid-tier archetype. Whether it be with this grass package or the Inteleon engine, I think both are going to be pretty viable. But yeah, definitely an interesting one. Pretty good numbers. Tries to do a lot. It's nowhere near as consistent as the old sort of Welder decks that are built around Welder. Gardenia is not as good as Welder in terms of as a build-around option, we don't think. But yeah, there are pretty high payoffs. And again, there's lots of great one-offs you can play in here. Flapple helps out with damage. Eldegoss helps out searching the energy for Gardenia. Kricketune helping you be a bit bulkier. There's lots of really cool options that you can play in this deck. And honestly, one of the more exciting decks I've played so far. It's also great being a grass type as well. You'll see shortly that there are some pretty key Pokemon that are weak to grass, so it may be just worth playing the grass type. Maybe even Lilligant as just a thin line in that deck, because you could play sort of a grass box that's built around Gardenia with Shamans and Zarudes, that kind of thing. So yeah, lots of options for this card. Yet to see how it's going to be played most optimally, but definitely different ways you can play it that look to be pretty cool.
Then we have a sort of pseudo reprint of Virizion V. Well, it's a reprint of Virizion EX with that same ability, basically saying that your Pokemon with grass energy attached can't be affected by special conditions and heal any from those Pokemon. And then it has the Emerald Blade attack for grass colorless. You do 200 flat and you can't attack during your next turn. Yeah, we really don't have many good status conditions in the format right now. We'll be looking at a Sneasler V later, but I think that's really about it. I don't think there's much in the way of status being a big issue. This is kind of one of those binder cards, and maybe status gets big later on. And I guess, in theory, it helps towards this tanking game plan that Jack was talking about, where Lilligant can become huge. You can make yourself no longer affected by status. I think sometimes combining status with Roxanne is like a really powerful thing, where you put your opponent down to a low hand size, like how we used to see like Stamp Raichu, those sorts of things. So Grass having that one card tech option to protect yourself against those plays is a nice thing for the binder in future. But for now, I don't think status is anywhere in the format.
Next up, we have Heatran VMAX. Unfortunately, this is a one-star card. The VMAXs of this set are not overly impressive, but this is definitely the weaker of the two. The Heatran V has Hot Burn for 30 damage, 220 HP, just worth mentioning, is pretty big, but nothing sort of unheard of. Hot Burn does 30 for 2 and burns, so it's essentially 50 for 2, but yeah, it's pretty weak. And then Lava Flow says if you have a Stadium in play, you do 180 for 3. Again, admittedly, you're going to be playing this with Magma Basin, so this is realistically looking to be 180 for 3, which isn't terrible, but also isn't great. It's only doing 210 with a Choice Band, which means you need additional damage here and there to be able to reach 220, which is awkward. The VMAX, if you were to build around this card, it would be around the VMAX's ability, Lava Enhancement, which says once during a turn, if you have a Stadium card in play, you may heal 50 damage from this Pokemon. So you can see kind of, again, the synergy with Magma Basin. You're naturally wanting the Magma Basins to help set up further Heatrans, and also being able to heal your active ones. You have lots of healing options to try and make this tanky. And then you have Max Heat, which has 180 and burns the opponent, so that's 200 essentially. But we've already talked a lot about Origin form Palkia, and unfortunately Heatran is weak to water, and that's basically enough said. Heatran is just not going to survive the onslaught of water decks that are going to be entering the format in the form of Palkia, as well as also just naturally having plenty of options, even things like Inteleons and stuff that will naturally be able to do a huge chunk against you, is pretty gross. So yeah, Heatran just falls, unfortunately, out of favor just because of the type it is. And whilst there's some reason to be playing water types, I think there's very little reason to be playing a 3-prize water type. I think if you're playing, a 3-prize fire type, if there's some reason to be playing fire types, I think there's almost no reason to be playing a 3-prize one, because it's realistically probably as susceptible as KO as a 2-prize one, but you're giving up less prizes, so you may as well just be a 2-prizer and make your opponent work a bit harder. There's definitely maybe some benefits to being fire type, but Heatran is not that for sure.
Onto the water stuff, we have Galarian Mr. Rhyme V. It's a fusion type basic with 210 hit points, 2 retreat cost. It has 2 attacks. The first is Surprising Hand. Search your deck for up to 3 item cards, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Maybe a combo enabler? Question mark. And it also has the customized cane attack for water colorless. You do 90, and if you have a tool attached, this does 90 more. So again, that 180 number with the belter, I would assume, gets you to 210. Still not a great number, but it is Fusion Strike, so maybe you can tablet your way through some certain things if you really have to. But yeah, I mean, maybe this helps cherry pick some cards for Fusion Strike, but we know Fusion Strike is a much more aggressive deck that doesn't want to sit back using an attack like this in those opening stages. Maybe also an enabler in like a Frostmoth box. There could still be a Frosty box going around. There's definitely a really good attacker in Radiant Greninja now that a deck like Frostmoth could benefit from, and this could be a 2-prize threat if you really need it to be, because Surprising Hand is pretty good at enabling Frostmoth for the following turn, but you're still giving up 2 prize cards in order to do this, so I don't think it's going to be worth its weight.
Next up, we have Origin Form Palkia V-Star, and I think this is our one of our favorite Pokemon in the set for sure. Origin Form Palkia V has 220 HP, Water type. First attack is Rule the Region, which actually search your deck for a Stadium card and put it into your hand. We've already talked about the natural synergy between that, Palkia and things like Temple of Sinnoh and Path to the Peak, so you can find those early. Nothing great, nothing groundbreaking, but at least it's a usable attack. And then Hydro Break does 200 for 3, similarly to Virizion, which again, nothing to write home about, but at least is usable. We have acceleration, so it's not like it's out of the realms of possibility. But the V-Star is seriously where this card shines. 280 HP, so we already know that's a huge number, which is really good. Weak to Lightning is another hugely relevant thing. There's not that many Lightning Pokemon right now, so this naturally makes the weakness a little bit less important. This could see an uptick of Lightning Pokemon for sure, but right now we don't have all that many that are being played, so that's a really good thing. Subspace Swell does 60 damage plus 20 more for each benched Pokemon. So essentially, this is like Suicune, basically just cracked Suicune. It's doing a base plus 40 on Blizzard Rondo. An attack that realistically was already very able to KO a lot of Pokemon with the use of Inteleon plus Choice Belt. This is getting a plus 60, a plus 40, which helps dealing with these V-Star Pokemon, which was kind of where Suicune started to fall down here and there in terms of damage cap. It was still able to compete, but it forced you to play Ludicolo, which was a stage 2 that was, whilst not super inconsistent, not ideal. And whilst this doesn't quite cover the damage that Ludicolo offered, it's often enough with Pings plus Pings plus Choice Belt to actually make it all the way to being still able to deal with V-Star Pokemon, which is fantastic. You've then got the Star Portal V-Star Power, which says during your turn you may attach up to 3 Water Energy cards from your discard pile to your Water Pokemon in any way you like. That's brilliant because, again, this is it's a Water deck that doesn't completely rely on Melanie. Naturally, you'll still be playing some Melanies for sure, because Melanie's a great supporter in the early turns for being able to really prepare these attackers. But it means in the mid-game, you can be using Irida, you can be using Boss, you can even be using Roxanne, while still presenting an absolutely huge threat in Origin Form Palkia. As well as that, you can set up things like Ice Rider, you can set up Radiant Greninjas, you can set up more Palkias, you can set up Suicunes, set up Inteleons, you can set up basically whatever attacker you need in that instant. From nowhere, essentially, which is really good. That means you have sniping options, 1-prize options, just poking options for the bench, just more attackers in general, big one-shot options. There's loads of things you can do with Star Portal, which is fantastic. Yeah, that's essentially it. There's nothing sort of flashy about this card other than it's just incredibly well statted, huge amounts of damage, and very versatile in terms of its V-Star power. We think this is definitely going to be entering a very high tier into the metagame. It looks like it's very good at keeping tempo with a lot of these 2-prize decks, as well as being able to trade up into the V-Star, VMAX decks here and there, which is really, really strong. You have tanking options as well. You have things like Cheryl that you can play to heal all the damage you take after taking a hit, and then being able to Star Portal back up. There's just loads of options. It's like Suicune Ludicolo, but you don't have the limitations of having to play this thin Ludicolo package. Admittedly, your damage isn't quite as high as Suicune's can be, but the amount of space you get and the amount of different options that you receive because you don't have to play this Ludicolo package really, really leans into being able to sort of play a variety of different cool techs here and there. And also, you have more HP than a Suicune with a giant cape on. Sorry, a cape of toughness on. So it's like you're a pre-caped Suicune with half a Ludicolo all the time, and sometimes you're able to set up another attacker out of nowhere, which means you're able to boss, which is basically something the deck couldn't do because then it had to play cross switches. I think the deck could easily still play cross switches because you're still relying on a Melanie here and there, but it means that you actually can play boss. And Suicune Ludicolo that can play boss is actually very scary, especially when, like I say, there's an inbuilt cape as well. So yeah, very, very strong card, and honestly one that I'm really excited about playing.
Next up, we have Starmie V, a card that could potentially even go into the Palkia deck, and a few others. It's a 190 hit point basic with free retreat, which is actually cracked, and it has 2 attacks. The first for 2 colorless is Swift, you do 50, and isn't affected by weakness, resistance, or any other effects, so it can be wall breaking if you really need it to be. 50 is not really enough damage to do the job, though. But its main attack here, Energy Spiral for 2 water energy, does 50 for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. This can really punish a couple of key archetypes in the format. This could really punish Arceus decks when they've Trinity Nova'd a bunch of energy onto 2 different threats. An Energy Spiral could simply come in, turn attach Melanie, and Spiral Response, or even a Raihan Spiral Response, and get a big uptrade. What's really nice is, obviously, this isn't like worried about weakness or anything like that. Oftentimes, right now, Arceus answers normally include random fighting types, but it gets blocked by Dunsparce, of course. So Astami puts Arceus in check in a different way, which I think is great. Of course, they can Trinity Nova less energies into play if they want, but that's already a benefit to you. And Energy Spiral is doing really good damage regardless. It could also be great for some of these dark decks. Like the Moltres deck or just a Darkrai V-Star. These all could easily find themselves with energy all over the place. So naturally, this Starmie comes in as a potential great tech include for Palkia decks, as well as Arceus decks playing this card for maybe even mirror match situations. We've seen Tapu Koko GX in the past be very relevant as like a 1-card include. I think Starmie V can be a very similar role here, especially because in the worst case scenario, you lead this guy, it's a pivot, it helps you get into Keep Calling, or it helps you get into your active Pokemon pretty happily and like evolve up into your V-Stars. So no real downside for this card, and it's a really nice tech include that has instant Melanie or Raihan synergy. And as we've just mentioned, Water is looking very good next set with Palkia at the forefront, so I can easily see this card splashing in.
Next up, we have Luxray V, one we alluded to earlier on. Luxray has a really interesting attack. It's a 210 HP lightning type. Its second attack is Radiating Pulse that does 120 and paralyzes the opponent when you discard 2 energy. But the more interesting attack is Fang Snipe for 2 colorless energy, does 30 damage, and your opponent reveals their hand. You discard a trainer you find there. So, kind of a controlling style card. You have sort of comparable to something like a Vikavolt or something where you can be, playing this lightning box that's kind of a control archetype. You've got paralysis, you've got discarding trainers, you've got item lock. These kind of interesting things, which is pretty cool. In general, we don't think it's quite really strong enough though. There's plenty of ways to be able to still build the hand up, especially if we're moving towards a format where you want to be having some kind of board-based draw because of Roxanne. So in a format where people are already playing around Roxanne, it's really not difficult to also be playing around Luxray at the same time, just by having the barrels on board, that kind of thing. But in combination with Roxanne, or even Marnie in the early turns, it can be pretty annoying. So that with, maybe a Path of the Peak or whatever, could be pretty annoying to deal with. In general, we just don't think it's going to be impactful enough. But yeah, definitely a very interesting attack. If it did 10 less damage, it also could be a bit quite interesting because it can mean you could double turbo, deal no damage, but dealing no damage at the end of the day can sometimes be a benefit because it means you can sort of gust something up and sort of strand something in the active. Whereas essentially later down the line with Fang Snipe, even if you're only doing 10 per turn, eventually it will get knocked out and your opponent will be able to move it out of the way. So yeah, it's in a bizarre situation where it actually is too much damage for it to be a super control option. Because eventually your opponent will be given a turn of breathing room. But yeah, a really interesting one. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But more and more of these cards that have these weird niche effects here and there, and eventually someone like Sander will do something with them. So we're kind of in like the general market. We don't think this is going to be a particularly strong card though. But it does definitely have my favorite V artwork in the set. So we will be giving it a shout out for that regardless.
Onto the psychic types, we have Hisuian Typhlosion V Star. The basic is a 210 hit point psychic type with 2 retreat cost. It has for 0 energy a Singe attack, which leaves the opponent's active burnt. And for Psychic Colorless, we have Shivering Flames doing 120. You can choose a card from your opponent's hand without looking, then reveal it and have them shuffle it back into their deck. It's a little bit annoying here and there, but an expensive attack to get rolling. Then we have the V-Star. It's 260 hit points and has the Hollow Flame attack for Psychic Colorless that does 180, and you get to put 3 counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way that you like. And the V-Star Power Shadow Roast Star for just 1 Psychic Energy says if your opponent's active has 4 counters on it, it is knocked out. So it reads exactly the same as the old Yveltal GX that had Doom Count GX. This time you're on a stage 1, which is a little bit more awkward, a little bit more work to get this Typhlosion going. Your opponent can see it coming, unlike the Yveltal here and there. So it's a little bit more work than that Yveltal back in the day, which already only saw sparing play. But we do have a few good ways to get exactly 4 counters on things. Obviously, the Hollow Flame, you can place your counters around if you are able to attack with this Typhlosion, but it seems too expensive to attack with over and over again. Even things like Raihan's and stuff won't help you chain very easily. You need extra acceleration on top of that. So perhaps Typhlosion fits in as a support role, as like a 1-1 or 2-2 line in a Dragapult VMAX, where you can be trickling counters around the place with Max Phantom. You've also got quick shooting at your disposal to, at one point in the game, have a Shadow Roast going for you, and you just take out a big threat all in one go. I think that's one of the bigger issues with Dragapult, even with, you know, Horror Energy and Choice Belt and whatnot, that Max Phantom is just power crept at the moment. Just the high hit points of all these V-Stars out there is just too much work for the Dragger, but forcing your opponent into an even more awkward prize map where they go through 1 Dragapult, then 1 Typhlosion, then another Dragapult could be beneficial to you, especially because that Shadow Roast could be a great way to just knock out a big threat only after tickling it with damage from a Max Phantom. I think that's really the only place I can see this Typhlosion as a bit part player here and there. But we've got precedent really from that Yveltal GX that was never too powerful, and that was on a basic, so I do think it's going to be awkward times for Typhlosion going ahead.
Next up we have Jirachi V, which has the Wish Bridge ability, which could be the basis of a deck itself. Wish Bridge says that when your basic Pokemon V is knocked out by damage from your opponent's Pokemon's attack, you may choose 1 basic energy from the knocked out Pokemon and move it to one of your other Pokemon. So essentially, it's like an inbuilt EXP share on all of your Pokemon, but only once. But that, honestly, is pretty good. It means that you can basically just have like 1 energy on board that is just permanent. It means that you can play maybe, you know, basically any type of energy, right? You can play a multitude of different energy types, always be able to keep 1 on board and then find the other one for an attacker. The kind of attackers that stick out to us the most are the legendary beasts that all have that 1 colorless in their cost, so they can all play with each other's typing and then be able to just attach the fire or the lightning or the water based on whichever legendary beast that you're attacking with, which is pretty cool. As well as Galarian Moltres V as well. That's another way of being able to prepare an attacker out of nowhere. You can attach to the Moltres and have it Wish Bridge attach an extra energy, and then Dire Flame Wings as the final energy to be able to get a Moltres basically out of nowhere, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it's really nice. Like I say, it's essentially an EXP share on everything, but you don't have to attach the energy, which is cool. It means you can attach things like Cape of Toughness and Choice Belt. There's a lot of benefit to being 2 prizes right now. Admittedly, a lot of the 2 prizes can sometimes struggle against some of the V-Star Pokemon because they're essentially the same, but with an inbuilt cape. But just being able to be a basic Pokemon can definitely bring its own benefits to the board. That in combination with Raihan as well means you can get these 3 energy attacks set up out of nowhere just from having the attacker down for a turn, which is pretty cool. And then you can keep your energy, keep storing your energy, blah, 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 until you're able to go into this weird EV, which could be a potential late game finisher with Psyshield Bass doing 40 times the number of energy essentially on your board, because it sucks it all up and pushes it to the active Weirdir when it moves into the active spot. So yeah, you can kind of see how this deck might be built. Just a whole heap of different basic V Pokemon hitting for different types with fairly efficient attacks that naturally would have had some pretty awkward energy costs or energy counts in the decks. Now you can kind of stitch all together with 1 or 2 Jirachis that help wrap it all up and give everything an EXP share. We don't think it's going to be super competitive. There's definitely sort of issues with the deck in general, but I think there's enough benefits to being 2-prize basic Pokemon right now in terms of tempo that it's definitely worth trying out and seeing if you can build kind of a counter box that all works off of each other, and Wishbridge, like I say, stitches it all together, which is pretty cool.
On to Hisuian Decidueye V-Star. It's a fighting type. The basic has 220 hit points. It has a 2 retreat cost, and it has the Mountain Hunt attack for 1 fighting. You can search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand. It's a nice little bonus to have. Yes, oftentimes your Decidueye could be knocked out in response, but it sometimes forces hand disruption, or at least gives you a play for the following turn, so it gets you into the game if needed. And you do have the point blank shot. For fighting and 2 colorless, you deal 100 and isn't affected by effects on the defending Pokemon. Not too shabby as well. Could be powered up in a turn in theory via a Gutsy plus double turbo energy to get just 80 damage onto the board, but it's possible and it can help set up numbers for you into fellow like V-Stars or V-Maxes. But the V-Star has 270 hit points and has the Somersault Feathers attack. For fighting and 2 colorless, you deal 160 base, but you can also discard up to 3 energy from your hand, and you deal 30 more for each you discarded in this way. So you can do up to 250 with the Somersault Feathers. It is 1 fighting and 2 colorless, which often means it's only a 230 damage attack, because you're going to have double turbo attached a lot of the time, or you have to have even more acceleration for a card like this, which is a little bit below the bar, I think. And you've also got that V-Star power, Star of Fortune. During a turn, you may draw until you have 8 cards in your hand. This is a really, really good V-Star power, and I think a card like this actually needs an ability of this strength, because you need so many energy in your hand to deal meaningful damage with the Somersault Feathers. But yeah, drawing up until 8 is fantastic. We've seen Cynthia's Ambition and how that's changed certain archetypes. Here you're getting it inbuilt on your own V-Star, which is great. It means as soon as you've hit an incense or whatever, similar to Arceus, where you just get your main guy into play and suddenly you're popping off, because the Star of Fortune can get you so many additional cards pre-supporter, which is great news. But yeah, I think really my main gripe with this card is that its attack cost is awkward. You need to play like a Gutsy Pickaxe package as well as the double turbo energies, which means you also need to have lots of switch outs in your deck. You need to have lots of ways to not only find energy but also recover energy so that you're doing meaningful damage. And even then, 230 isn't that good, even with belts. Yes, you're knocking out some smaller V-Stars, but not all of them. So yeah, it's just below the bar in terms of damage, which really is putting me off. And naturally, you are weak to Psychic. You are going to have to find ways around other matchups like Mew, for example. Your fighting typing is good, but of course, at least Arceus is going to deny that advantage that you have anyway via Dunsparce pretty happily. So yeah, I think right now its attack cost is just that little bit too awkward, and you're having to throw cards from hand away all the time as well, which is obviously an important resource and gets disrupted in the late game by Roxanne and stuff, which can really put you in a horrible spot. So a little bit weak for me.
Next up, we have Claymore V-Star. This is actually one we're getting in a box, but we wanted to point it out because it's coming out around the same time as the set. Claymore V has is 210 HP, has Cut for 40 damage for 1 energy, and then Battle Axe Slash for 3 energy. That does 150. You discard energy from this Pokemon and then an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon, neither of which are particularly impactful. Keep in mind, again, you can use the Gutty Pickaxe to help power this up a little bit quicker than than you have been able to previously. But yeah, Claymore V-Star has 270 HP and has the Break Axe attack, which does for 2 energy, 120 to the active and 60 to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon V. So net 180 damage isn't bad for 2 energy, but just adding 1 extra energy on compared to Arceus, you can be doing essentially 180 and attaching 3 extra energy, which is really good. Also, it's not countered by things like Manaphy and stuff, which this is. So comparing these two is a bit awkward, because you can see that whilst 180 net damage for 2 energy is pretty impactful, because it's not guaranteed and it's not really accelerating the board state too much. It pales in comparison compared to some of the other V-Stars we have right now. Then you've got Rampaging Star as the V-Star power for 1 energy that does 30 damage times the number of Pokemon in your discard pile, so similar to one of these Vengeance style attacks. Huge damage huge modifier, and honestly, it will almost always be taking a KO, which is great. That's really what you want from a V-Star power. You want it to be completely changing the texture of the game. But because it's only a one-time attack, you're then having to rely back more on this break axe attack, which really isn't too impactful. In general, like maybe it could be used in a similar way that sort of Wormadam is used here and there in this sort of like one prize box. You can maybe run a thin Cleavor line or whatever, but in general, this card is way too weak to actually be doing anything other than this V-Star power, and there's way better 1/1 V-Stars you could be playing for their V-Star power than just doing, essentially taking 2 prizes realistically a lot of the time, but again, not really changing the texture of the game very much, giving up 2 prizes to do so. All of it sounds really awkward in comparison to a lot of other things you can be doing. So just not quite efficient enough, unfortunately.
We also have a Machamp VMAX in the set. The basic has 220 hit points. It has Revenge Buster for fighting colorless. You do 50 plus if your bench Pokemon have any damage counters on them, an additional 50, not blowing me away at all. And it does have the Seismic Toss attack for fighting colorless. You do 140, which doubled can knock out an Arceus V-Star at least. So even if you miss the VMAX, maybe if they're missing the Dunsparce, it can still be a useful attack here and there. But it's really all about the VMAX here. You have 330 hit points, reasonably bulky. You do have a Psychic weakness, which is going to be a big hindrance for you. Cross your fingers that there's enough dark stuff keeping Mew in check, but it does have the Revenge Buster upgrade on the VMAX here for fighting colorless. Once again, you do 80, and if your bench Pokemon have any damage counters on them, you do 140 more damage. Pretty solid damage output there. The 220 just for 2 is relatively efficient. How often have we seen damaged Arceuses that you can just like retreat out of? Oftentimes you'll see them using Sharon's Care, of course, but in this case, you could be using it to fuel your Revenge Buster. And it also has the G-Max Chi Strike for fighting colorless. You do 240, and you can't use the Chi Strike on the following turn. Interestingly enough, we've seen some different builds of Arceus popping up recently. We saw the Arceus Bibarel Lucario V-Star win a recent regional, and we also saw high placements for an Arceus V-Star alongside Corviknight VMAX. And I feel like Machamp could fill that similar role. You know, where there's an Arceus, there's a way. We can try and actually get this guy rolling. Its fighting type coverage is reasonable, but also the Chi Strike just hitting that 240 number is the same thing we've been looking for with the Corviknight and the Lucario here. And you can do it on another big body with that fighting type coverage, which is pretty reasonable. You have a 2-energy attack. You have potential Gutty Pickaxe, which is a benefit not just to the Machamp, but also to Arceus. You could play Oranguru and get 3 energy into play all in one go with that Trinity Nova Starbirth sort of combo. So it could be overtaking Lucario V-Star in an Arceus Bibarel Bats sort of package if you want to, or overtaking the Corviknight. I feel like it could find its place, and it's one of those things where you basically never look at this card and read it with any serious thought without Arceus, but we've seen so much Binder Bulk be used thanks to Arceus that we're giving it that sort of middling rating because it could easily just slot in over the Lucario that we've just seen win a regional, and that's why we're giving it this small nod, because its numbers are still very reasonable. You'd imagine if it's in an Arceus deck, you're going to also have some other type coverage to help out against Mew, so this never sees the light of day in that matchup. That's really what we're thinking about this card.
Onto the dark types, and they are pretty impressive. We're kicking things off with Darkrai V-Star, which we've gone for a 4-star on. Darkrai V is a 210 HP dark type with the Dark Wind attack for 50 for 2 energy, and Dark Hole for 3 energy, doing 130. And put your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep, nothing too impactful there. Where it gets into real crazy damage is with the Darkrai V-Star. Darkrai V-Star has 270 HP, on the slightly lower side, or like more reasonable side for V-Star Pokemon, definitely within range of some things. Dark Pulse for 2 colorless energy does 30 damage plus 30 more for each dark energy attached to all of your Pokemon. So this is essentially Tag Team Greninja and Zoroark GX's attack, but on a stage 1. But admittedly, it only gives up 2 prizes, which is pretty cool. Realistically, you're probably only going to be playing dark energy in the deck, so it's 2 for 90 minimum. But we have things like Dark Patch and both Galarian and Moltres to be able to help ramp up your energy count and really push into what surprised me in terms of damage output in the early turns with this. it definitely can reach sort of that 270 range fairly easily, which is kind of crazy because that's a really big number. It's with a choice belt, it's only 7 energy on board. And when realistically you're accounting for the 2 energy that you attack with, it's only 5 energy on board. So that's like 1 or 2 dark patches. You have Moltres, you have Baby Molt here and there. That's really not that difficult to do, especially with that Star Abyss V-Star power that says during your turn you may put up to 2 item cards from your discard pile into your hand. So that can grab more dark patches to be able to really push for that early KO with Dark Pulse, which is pretty nice. Or even more Trekking Boots, which is how we've actually initially built the deck, which seems pretty impressive. Helps discard those dark energy early on to be able to turn those dark patches, make them live, as well as making Galarian Moltres V live as well as just being able to turbo through the deck and draw into the dark patches way more frequently, which is cool. Being able to play Radiant Greninja as well is really important to be able to help turn the dark patches and the Moltres V's ability on as well. So that's really good. More drawing is just it's the definition of a turbo deck. It's the way Turbo Dark has always been, and it's nothing new. Anyone who's played Turbo Dark in its like 4 or 5 iterations over the past like 10 years will feel very, very at home with this deck. And you're a fantastic type, and you get to play 2 cards that are naturally well established in the format right now in Galarian Moltres V and Baby Galarian Molt. So yeah, really, really good package. In general, the only thing that we did find with it is, it is a turbo deck, but you really do have to get off the ground running. And if you do sort of stunter here and there, it can be quite difficult to get back into the game, even with something like a Moltres, because a lot of your early to mid game attackers are 2 prizes. It can be a little bit difficult to get back into the game. But honestly, it really impressed me in terms of its power level, in terms of how quickly you could actually ramp up to the damage you need to. And yeah, it's not going to be sort of the top tier of decks for sure, but we think it's going to be a very respectable mid-tier archetype that will definitely be keeping decks honest, which is kind of what Turbo Dark has always done. It's nothing new, nothing sort of special, and again, you'll feel very at home if you've played any of the various iterations of Turbo Dark over the past decade, but it's not a bad place to feel at home. It's a very consistent archetype, and one that is honestly an absolute blast to play.
Next up we have Hisuian Sneasler V. It's a basic with 190 hit points. It does have that nice free retreat, which I think is actually really notable here. And it has the Poison Claws attack for no energy, just to poison the opponent's active. And it has Dire Claw for dark and colorless. You do 80x the number of special conditions affecting your opponent's active. So very similar to the Salazzle that we already have in format. Salazzle does a 90 multiplier. So the Sneasler actually needs to do a bit more work. Probably needs Choice Belt in there to be able to hit, V-Stars, for example, for a knockout. The good news is you're a dark type, so you can still find a way to knock out Muse via weakness. We have a Temple of Sinnoh now, which means Butterfree actually affects free fusion energy, which I think is important. Or you could just play other dark attackers, because you're likely using Dark Patch here to make that 2 energy attack cost work for you. I think if ever there's going to be a rogue deck around this, it's obviously going to be based around Butterfree and Scoop Up Net, so you can burn, confuse, and poison the opponent straight away, pushing you into those high 200s, which is very solid. And the free retreat is going to be big, I think, because the only way I can ever see this working is if you retreat and protect your Sneasler behind like a Diancie or something like that. Try and protect your early game board so that your opponent only takes a 1-prize knockout, and then you can start coming in swinging onto their main attacker first. You can be the one sort of dictating the tempo here. At the end of the day, though, you're having to fill your board with Butterfrees and whatnot. You're going to have to find some other draw engine along the way. Maybe just like Greninja's going to be enough for you with Dark Patch synergy and whatnot. It's still going to be a lot of work here and there, and you're going to miss pieces along the way, which is going to be awkward for you. But yeah, fun card. Definitely a nice combo, and if you like playing Butterfree Salazzle, I think this will be an upgrade from that deck at the very least. And yeah, you actually have a passable Mew matchup, which is actually one of the things holding back Salazzle Butterfree outside of horrific consistency.
Next up, we have Hisuian Samurott V-Star, another brilliant V-Star or Dark-type Pokemon entering the format. Hisuian Samurott V has 220 HP, has the Zigzag Drop attack as its first attack for 1 Dark Energy that discards up to 2 Pokemon tools attached to your opponent's Pokemon. Pretty niche, but we actually have used it in the past in testing so far, so definitely not completely irrelevant. And then Shadow Slash. For 3 energy, does 180, and you discard an energy from this Pokemon. That's actually very, very useful to know, because 3 energy is within range with Dark Patch plus Raihan, for sure. And letting you attack with a basic Pokemon to deal super effective damage on a Mew VMAX can be pretty important, especially when they can get around the effect of Merciless Blade fairly easily. So yeah, definitely a good one to keep in mind for sure. The Hisuian Samurott V-Star has 270 HP and does have that Merciless Blade attack for 2 energy that does 110 damage, and if the opponent's active Pokemon has any damage counters attached on them, it does 110 more. So that's 220 realistically, 230 with the damage counter they have, 260 with a Choice Belt. That's already hitting some pretty good numbers. You only need an extra Zigzagoon or Inteleon ping here and there to be hitting that 280, which is a great number to be at, especially just for 2 energy. Very, very efficient attack. You've obviously got Dark Patch. You're naturally playing a Dark deck, so Moltres fits in very well. You already want the benefits of quick shooting from Inteleon, so you've got a fantastic engine. So yeah, you can already see kind of the straight Hisuian Samurott V-Star deck being pretty cool. And it also has the inbuilt Moon Cutting Star ability as its V-Star power that says once during a turn you may put 4 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So that can be the way to deal that initial damage to be able to Merciless Blade in the early turns whilst you're waiting to set up Inteleons or find more Zigzagoons here and there to be able to do it more consistency in the mid to late game. That alone would make the card good enough. This would still probably be a 4-star card realistically. But one other way of playing Hisuian Samurott that could be pretty toxic, to be honest. We don't think it's going to be quite as impactful as we first thought, but Moon Cutting Star placing 4 damage counters on, say, a Sobble, and then Medicham with its Yoga Loop attack being able to place another 2 damage counters on a Sobble and take an extra turn could be pretty devastating in terms of crippling an opponent's board setup. Because yeah, you're able to take out a Sobble, plus maybe then even a second Sobble or a Drizzle or whatever, sort of on concurrent turns from as early as turn 2, which is pretty gross, to be honest. It means that the opponent can struggle to even get into the game, whilst you're then able to start building up a crazy sort of built combo off the back of Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX to then really continue to put pressure on this on their board state that you're trying to cripple early game. Admittedly, it's a lot. It's taking the Rapid Strike Urshi deck that we already have and trying to jam in even more. And it definitely comes with inherent consistency issues. But there will definitely be, if nothing else, highlight reel moments where you will go from basically nothing to taking out multiple of your opponent's Sobbles, maybe even realistically probably 2, sometimes 3, maybe even 4 or 5 across 2 turns. Which is absolutely incredible, and from as early as turn 2 is pretty strong. So yeah, it's definitely not going to be the more traditional way of playing the deck, but the more traditional way of playing the deck still seems very powerful. Naturally, a fairly good Mew, especially with again Temple of Sinnoh being able to get around the Fusion Strike energy and allow Zigzagoons and Inteleons to really put pressure onto the Mews to then Merciless Blade them. Similarly, you can just be gusting up the Genesects because they typically don't have the Fusion Energy on. You can just be gusting around the Mews whilst you're waiting to find that Temple of Sinnoh and quite happily be taking 2 prizes here and there and crippling their board setup as well. So yeah, very strong into the Mew matchup. Can reach V-Star damage in terms of like the Arceus matchup, which is basically the other big pillar of the format at the moment. So yeah, very, very impressive card. Naturally, some consistency issues compared to some of the other V-Star Pokemon. It's not getting to search out 2 of any card it wants or draw up to 8 or anything like that. There's no inbuilt consistency, but having the Inteleon engine on your side is never going to be a bad thing. So yeah, very impressive card, and one that we think we'll see definitely the higher tier of mid-tier decks for sure.
Onto the metal stuff, we have a really spicy one. We have Origin Form Dialga V-Star. The basic has 220 hit points as a metal type and has Metal Coating as its first attack. For a colorless, you can attach up to 2 metal from your discard pile to this Pokemon. It's something, but again, leaving 2 prizes just to do an attack like this is rarely going to pay off for you unless you're up against lower damage output decks. It also has the Temporal Rupture attack for metal colorless. 3 metal in the colorless. You do 180 vanilla, not too impressive. But then we have the Dialga V-Star. 280 hit points is pretty bulky. And it has the Metal Blast attack for 1 colorless. You do 40 plus 40 more for each metal attached to this Pokemon. So it will take a decent number of these to get into high damage output, but it's not unheard of, especially by the way we're going to try and build this deck. We're at least going to get 5 energy on to use that V-Star power of his, the Chrono Star attack. You do 220, and you take another turn after this one. One of mine and Jack's favourite effects throughout the entire TCG is taking another turn. You get to dip again on all sorts of abilities. You get to draw for turn. You get to play a second supporter, all while your opponent can't react. And it means that in certain cases, if you've prepared the board properly, you can take a knockout on an attacker whilst taking a second turn, and then take a knockout on another key attacker. Or you can do a crazy like Roxanne play into Chrono Star into another thing where you deal with like their engine Pokemon as well as putting meaningful damage onto an attacker or finishing it off or something like that. So you just have so much flexibility when you're given a second turn. And you naturally play around Roxanne very well as well. If you save this to be your late game sort of sweep play, it means your opponent can rarely ever touch your hand in a meaningful way outside of Marnie, which I think is really huge. So the combo potential is there. Trust me, I am sold on taking 2 turns. It can be busted. How are we going to get there? That's really the big question. How are we going to make this wonderful combination work? Because 5 energy sure is a lot, and you may even need more with that Metal Blast to be able to knock out, V-Star Pokemon that are chilling on the bench, or V-Maxes even. Oftentimes you need to weave in boss's orders, so Chrono Star is taking 2 prizes at least, so there's lots of things to consider here. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and sit behind the new Diancie card that we still haven't looked at just yet, but essentially it means that all your basic Pokemon are safe on the bench from boss's orders. That's really what it comes down to. So we leave Diancie's in the active position. Either you're using Intrepid Sword to draw up cards and sometimes hit Metal Energy to put them into play, or you can use the Spike Draw attack even with Diancie to draw a couple cards as you progress through the game. You don't mind getting Metal Energy into the discard pile because you play Saucer, and because you could even play EXP Share if you wanted to. And you're going to have your Zacian, your Dialga, you're going to have your Bronzor down, and you're just going to be chilling with those things, building up a combo whilst you draw these cards and only give up 1 prize per turn. And then once you are done using Diancie, on your combo turn, you evolve into your V-Star, you evolve into your Bronzong, and start moving the energies around and trying to get this Chrono Star rolling. The issue sometimes can be that you may have sacrificed too many prizes to get this combo rolling, that even taking your second turn isn't enough, because you've basically given up like your first 3 turns of the game just building towards this combo. So it's a really interesting card in terms of like how you can twist the tempo and make it interesting for you. But at the end of the day, we are still a big combo deck. You are going to be sacrificing prizes here and there. If ever your Diancie protection is removed for any reason, it's going to be an issue for you. You're going to feel bad against like Path of the Peak as well, so you can't like Intrepid Sword and draw cards throughout the game. You are going to have thin lines of your Dialga and Bronzong that can get picked apart by the opponents. If there's going to be like escape ropes coming in there, that could be awkward for Diancie. If there's cross switches, that's obviously hell for you. So this deck really is going to be walking a consistency tightrope and will get completely bodied by people if they start teching for it. So there's never a world where this becomes top tier, I don't think, because it's so easy to just pick this engine apart. But it could end up being this really fun sort of rogue, maybe as high as mid-tier deck, because, man, taking 2 turns, it's just so much fun. It's a great sort of mini goal to work towards, and I think it's been well balanced here in that it's just too many hoops to jump through ultimately. But boy, is it fun.
Next up, we have Garchomp V. Garchomp V is a Dragon-type Pokemon that's very comparable to Flygon. It has a it has a Dragon Claw attack for 3 energy for 120. Water fighting colorless, so again, you're probably having to Gutty Pickaxe this, or Arceus, similarly to how you're going to have to be doing the same with Flygon. And then you've got Sonic Strike for 4 energy. It says discard 3 energy from this Pokemon and do 220 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, or one of your opponent's Pokemon, sorry. So a 220 snipe anywhere, discarding 4 energy. Very comparable to Flygon in that basically they both require 4 energy for a big effect. Admittedly, arguably a 220 snipe is better than just 320 against a VMAX, especially with VMAXs becoming less and less popular. But a lot of the time, 220 won't be taking 2 prizes. It sometimes will be, but it sometimes won't be, because people will have seen the Garchomp coming, been able to evolve all of their V Pokemon into their V Stars or whatever. So it's only really guaranteed taking prizes on things like Crobat and stuff, and even they're being evolved these days into V Maxes. So there's just not that many targets for Sonic Strike, and even when there are, there's plenty of these decks playing Manaphy anyway. So in general, very comparable to Flygon, but Flygon, in its niche use, is pretty consistent at what it's doing, whereas Garchomp, whilst being a bit more flexible, realistically probably isn't anywhere near as consistent as actually getting this attack off and being able to get the benefit of a 220 snipe, unfortunately.
Onto the colourless stuff, we have Oranguru V. And boy, look what they've done to you. I'm so upset. We normally get such insane Oranguru cards, but our Oranguru V is a 210 hit point basic, colourless type. It has the ability Order. Once during a turn, if this Pokemon is in your active, you can search your deck for 2 tools, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Yeah, I mean, it's just not high impact, unfortunately. This card has a 2 retreat cost, so almost always one of those tools that you're going to be grabbing is a balloon for himself to become a pivot. But there really aren't that many reasons to start accumulating tools or anything like that in the format. Maybe you could play some important one-offs like EXP share that we've seen recently in Whimsicott. But surely that's not impactful enough to go ahead and add this Oranguru into your deck and have it as a pivot. There's got to be better things for you out there. It does have a Psychic attack for 3 colourless. You do 30 plus 50 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. It can come in and put a shift, and it does have a colourless attack cost, so it's splashable in that regard, but I just think it's not worth it for Tool Tutor, because we already have Shady Dealings, and that gets tools and everything else you want under the sun. I think the only ever thing I can think about is that maybe it's a faster way to Jolteon now. Maybe there's a Big Barrel engine that can play one Oranguru for just the opening stages, where you can get a balloon for himself, but an early memory capsule, so you can actually get a turn 2 Jolt down against Intel players. That could kind of be scary, but otherwise I think he's not doing enough for us.
We have Weirdeer V now, which is a 2 prize colourless Pokemon for 220 HP. We've rated this a 2-star. It's definitely an effect we've seen before in this Opening Road ability. Opening Road says once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active, you may move any number of energy from your other Pokemon to it. And then Psyshield Bash for 3 energy does 40 times the number of energy attached to this Pokemon. So you can see the inbuilt synergy here, very similar to something like a Heatran GX, which was very, very powerful and turned out to be a very important piece of these Firebox decks. But in general, Weirder's sort of numbers we don't think are going to be impactful enough to see a huge amount of play. Maybe a tech here and there, a tech one-off here and there. But it's not just having a 40 times multiplier isn't really strong enough. The only decks that like to flood the board of energy are things like turbo decks like Darkrai, which typically Darkrai will probably be doing not necessarily more of a multiplier, but as consistent of a multiplier in the mid game anyway. And Arceus, which again, you need 5 energy to be able to match Arceus' damage. And Arceus also sets up another attacker, whereas Weirdeer is very much if I'm not winning the game and this gets KO'd, I'm probably losing the game because I'm sort of all in with this Psyshield Bash play. So both of those sort of are pretty meh. Similarly with Gardenia's Vitality, in the same way that Heatran liked Welder decks, Weirdeer could definitely be splashed into some of these Gardenia decks, but again, 40 times instead of 50 times is a considerable difference, especially when we're looking at sort of 280 as the benchmark now. That means you have to have 7 energy on board for Weirdeer to be able to one-shot an Arceus, for example, which is pretty intimidating, to be honest. You do have things like Choice Belt plus Powerful Colorless in maybe a tanky Blissey variant to be able to just build up lots of energy with that Blissful Blast attack, start taking early prizes with that, add a Cape of Toughness, really make the Blissey difficult to deal with, and then Weirdeer and try and take some late game prizes because of that. But it all sounds a bit too fairy tale, a bit too niche. I think might be a nice one-off. It's probably a nice one-off to pick up here and there, just as a potential include in basically anything. It being colourless does lend itself to be splashable everywhere. But right now, I think there's other options for a lot of the decks that naturally would play it. That would mean Weirdeer isn't quite strong enough. But yeah, the flexibility of the guard alone means that maybe just picking up one as a one-off is not a bad idea at all.
So that wraps up the Vs, V-Stars, and V-Maxes. Pause now if you want to, but let's move on to the 1 prize stuff. Starting off with Grass once again, we have Hisuian Voltorb. It's a 50 hit point basic with 1 retreat, and it has the Chipper Charge attack, which requires no energy, and says you can only use this attack if you go second and on your first turn, choose up to 2 of your benched Pokemon for each of them, search your deck for a basic energy, and attach it to that Pokemon. So certainly limited in its use, only if you're the player going second, and you have to get it into the active position, so you're going to be compromising your deck, playing multiple switch cards, or if your deck naturally plays a number of 1 retreat cost Pokemon, in theory, you could just pay retreat out to get 1 additional energy into play, essentially, where you pay the 1, but you're getting 2 for free, which is kind of nice. And you are leaving a 1 prize Pokemon in the active position, which is also a big benefit for the player going second. So you at least force boss's orders or some sort of gusting from the opponent to take meaningful prizes. But what I do think is that you can still get bossed, and I would much rather pay retreat into a Diancie, I think, in most situations, and only allow the opponent to take a 1 prize knockout on that turn and let me rebound into their main attacker on the following. I think that's probably going to be much safer than having a Hisuian Voltorb sort of powering up multiple threats. I think in just a pure prize race situation, the Diancie is going to be favourable. There's also a Basculin that we'll look at later, which has potentially an equally, if not more powerful, attacking effect for no energy as well. So the Hisuian Voltorb does have some stiff competition. It's one of these cards where you need to have already drawn quite well going second. You need to already have Pokemon you want to attach your energies onto. You need to have already got this into the active position via switch outs or ball search or just paying retreat in the first place. So it's one of these cards that improves like a fairly good hand, but doesn't actually help a bad hand. So that's why we're going to give it that 1-star rating.
Next up, we have Kricketune, one that I mentioned earlier on. Kricketune is a 90 HP stage 1 that has the Overflowing Melody ability that says the HP of each Grass-type Pokemon executing any Kricketune is increased by 40, and you can only have 1 Overflowing Melody active at one time. So essentially, pushing Hisuian Lilligant up into 300, Zarude up into 260. With a Cape, Zarude is 310. That's a 310 2-prize Pokemon that's doing 240 to V Pokemon every turn, which is pretty good, as well as having an early game leap-to-leap 30-30 attack, which is great for setting up damage, especially on some of these V-Stars that Jungle Rage wouldn't quite reach. But Jungle Rage is also hitting weakness on Darkrai and Darkrai and Samurott, which look to be sort of very moderate to good tier 2 archetypes. So yeah, it's a great time to be a grass type. Nice little addition, just a very easy to splash in 1/1 line for your grass decks that sometimes will force the opponent to force a boss out of the opponent and force them to skew their own prize trade, because just having naturally plus 40, if you're dealing with 3 V Pokemon, that's plus 120. That's an extra 120 damage across the game they have to find, whereas Kricketune is only 90 damage, so maybe they might end up trying to target the Kricketune, skew their prize trade here and there, which is never a bad thing, because then you can just carry on trying to play that 7 prize game with something like Zarude or Lilligant. So yeah, very simple, very nice addition to these grass decks that look to really be gaining a lot from this set. Very exciting stuff.
We also have that Vespiquen. We mentioned it when talking about that honey pot item. It has the honey rush attack for 1 grass. You do 60x the number of honeys in your hand, and you get to keep them in hand at least, which is nice, I guess. But it's still not that good a damage, and you need to really work hard for it. It's an item as well, so we can only really Peonia for the card if we want to get it out of our prize cards, which could really make your damage even worse. And also you have like low hit points on all your combis, which is a big issue when there's Inteleon Yoga Loop stuff going around. There's also that Samurott that could try and punish you. There's all sorts that could be awkward for this stage 1 attacking sort of threat. The good news is, like, it's pretty easy to just play a 4/4 Vespi line and just, 4 honeypots. It's a lot of space that you're sort of eating up where they're not doing anything for you. They're just inconsistent cards in your deck, but you should have a good amount of space because it's just 1 energy attachment throughout the game. You can quite easily play an Inteleon engine, which is shady dealing for the pots, as well as for things like Cynthia's Ambition to try and grow that hand size initially to try and help you get there, but still feels like way too much work. You will get hand disrupted. Like a late game Roxanne, no matter how you slice it, is going to be horrific for you. So yeah, it's going to be an inconsistent 1 prize mess, I think.
And Mega is an interesting 1 prize grass type that you could maybe add into a Zoroark deck. Typically not good enough on its own, but it does have free retreat, which is a nice pivot. Altaria is currently being used for that, so having an attacker built into that is pretty cool, though. Tempting Tune is pretty good. Mega's attack, Wide Wing, for 40 damage. for 2 energy, does 40 damage, and if you have more cards in your hand than your opponent, you do 80 more damage. Typically, the Zoroark deck has been built off of the back of Sinnoh, and Sinnoh engines obviously are fairly good at being able to build up a large hand size. So realistically, you can see this doing 120 a lot of the time. I've just mentioned grass is a pretty good type to be, so grass doing 120 with a choice belt or even that super effective goggles is pretty cool. Being able to KO these 2-prize Pokemon, obviously with a choice belt doing 300 is very, very good because you're quite easily KOing things like Samurott and Darkrai with the choice belt. So yeah, very nice addition there. I think typically though it's not going to be quite good enough just because it's a condition that you're able to play. Your opponent's able to play around. Admittedly, because it's Zoroark based, you can kind of surprise them with it, but Wormadam is not something that they can play around, and whilst it's definitely a lower damage mod, 120 isn't difficult for Wormadam to reach anyway. It's not a huge amount. It's only 9 Pokemon in the bin, which isn't that hard. So yeah, basically the big benefit of the card is just having free retreat. And whilst it's a nice addition, I'm pretty sure Altaria is still a very worthwhile addition in the deck just because of the natural engine the deck is going to be playing. So I don't think it will overtake Altaria in the free retreat option either.
Onto the fire stuff, we have the Radiant Heatran. Possibly a reason for us to look at fire once again. Fire really didn't do all that well despite us having this amazing Magma Basin Stadium card. This could be a new combo that makes fire that little bit more worthwhile. And like Jack was saying with that Cricketune, where people see a 1-prize threat and sort of have to deal with it, skews their own prize race, forces maybe an extra turn out of the game in general. I think the Heatran's going to do a very similar purpose here because it feels like it chills on the bench for at least a turn. It has 160 hit points and it has this Raging Bomber attack for fire and 2 colorless. You do 70 times the amount of damage counters on this Pokemon. So Magma Basin naturally puts 2 damage counters on you whilst attaching a fire onto this guy. And thanks to its 3 energy attack cost, normally you're going to sort of base into it once and see what the opponent does. Really? Do they want to deal with your attacker that's currently like hitting through them and is often going to be like a multi-prize Pokemon, like an Entei, for example? Or are they going to eyes sort of bulge, they see that Radiant Heatran, they see that the next turn you could be threatening 280, right? If you basin twice and turn attach, you're going to be at that 280 threshold. And we've seen how scary a Meloetta getting to 280 can be. The Heatran can do something very similar here. So this is a great way to try and make a sort of 2-prize fire deck, force an extra turn out of the opponent, which is just fantastic. So Heatran may often just like not attack at all, but because the opponent's completely changed their game plan to deal with this card, is going to be very beneficial. Or they stick to their prize mapping strategy, they take some multiple prize Pokemon out of play, you get to trigger this Heatran, and then you're forcing, you know, boss's orders from them, or something like that. And if they're getting around the Heatran, it's just going to get even more deadly. So yeah, it feels like a threat that your opponent almost always has to deal with, and it naturally fits in nicely with the Basin. I don't think it's going to be a speedy card, but it completely changes the complexion of the game based on how your opponent wants to react around him. It's obviously awkward where you're competing against Radiant Greninja. Even the Fire decks would love Radiant Greninja because it gets energy into the discard pile. But the Heatran is specifically strong for some of these Fire decks, and I'm really excited to try him out because I think there's a ton of potential here.
Well, I think it's worth noting, just back on the Radiant, is you can only play 1 Radiant. We hadn't talked about this. You can only play one Radiant card in your deck. So we'll talk about Greninja and Hawlucha shortly, but yeah, you can only play one of them in your deck, whether it's one Radiant Heatran or whatever. You can't play one of each. So yeah, that was what Joe was referencing in terms of why you might still want to play the Greninja, because it means you can't play the Heatran. It's kind of interesting how basically all of the Radiant Pokemon kind of step on each other's toes, because all of them are also good in basically any deck they're in. This is the most sort of honed in one because it's only good in a fire deck because of the fire attack cost. But yeah, all of them kind of, like I say, touch on each other's toes, and you really struggle to know which one your opponent might be playing, because they could be playing any of them. So yeah, really interesting mechanic. Onto that Basculin that Joe mentioned earlier on, has the schooling attacks, a 50 HP basic that has schooling for free. It lets you search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon and put them straight onto the bench. Now we've seen plenty of different bench attacks a bit like this. We have Sobble, Minccino, and Gossifleur, all of which have seen success here and there, which is really cool. This one is free, which is definitely worth noting because it means that you can attach to another Pokemon and retreat into Basculin to be able to Schooling, which is great. Very comparable to Alolan Vulpix, which is arguably one of the best starters back in the early Sun and Moon era. So yeah, definitely a card to keep an eye on. I think for now, because Inteleon engines are fantastic, because Minccino evolves into Cinccino, which is a great engine itself, and because Gossifleur naturally evolves into Eldegoss, all of these are very good Pokemon in their own right. But come rotation, we lose Drizzile. Come rotation, we lose Cinccino. I think Hisuian Basculin could definitely be the forefront of like a very similar, well, similarly to how Alolan Vulpix was played in a lot of different decks back in the Sun and Moon era. This could definitely be the starter of choice post rotation. For now, we think it's only going to be used in very niche scenarios where you're not playing a Cinccino or an Inteleon engine. Hisuian Basculin is probably the one to go to. But in general, there's not many of those decks out there right now, so that's why we've just dropped it down to a 2-star. But still a very powerful effect, especially for free, because it's just not having to attach energy means that you can actually get into this so much easier than many of these other Call for Family style attacks.
Then we have the Radiant Greninja, and you can see this is the actual English scan, so you can read that Radiant Pokemon rule very easily. You are a basic water Pokemon with 130 hit points and a 1 retreat cost, and you have the insane ability. It's called Concealed Cards. Pretty ironic, but you must discard an energy from your hand in order to draw 2 cards. So that is exceptional. Very often there are cards that want to... there are decks that really want energy in the discard piles. We're getting Dark Patch from this set. There's already Metal Sorcerer in format. There's already Melanie. All of these sorts of engines will really benefit from a card like Radiant Greninja that sees energy in the discard pile as pure upside. So it's helping you enable your strategy whilst drawing cards at the same time, which is just absolutely absurd. Even in decks where it can be painful to remove energy, you have Training Court in the game, you have Clara. This card can even be hit with Scoop Up Net as well. You can pick up and put down Greninjas to use multiple concealed card abilities in a turn, which is absolutely absurd. And I think this card, alongside like just 1 or 2 Crobats, Trekking Boots, maybe even Gutty Pickaxe if you're feeling like it, but like heavy VIP pass, real like fast turbo engines can be a thing of this format. And I think it's something we've just not really had enough push potential in the opening turns to go for that until now. But I think the combination of this card and the boots really gives us a way to have turn 1 combo style decks where you're using double patch in a turn, or you're using that Moltres to get a turn 1 Aura Burn off. You can use multiple Sorcerer and get an attack in. Who's to say you can't get a Zacian Brave Blade in straight out the gates thanks to Greninja concealing cards, popping off of Scoop Up Nets and really getting things rolling. This card is absolutely absurd. It should basically always be the first Radiant on your list, and you need massive, massive reason to deviate from this card, because it is going to be a one-of in basically everything, I think. It is completely disgusting. And it also has an attack, which is usable in a couple decks for even added help here. For water colorless, you have Moonlight Shuriken. You discard 2 from this Pokemon, and you do 90 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. And Palkia is already going to be a archetype that loves this. We've just mentioned the Melanie synergy. So, yeah, why not have this as a 1-prize attacking option as well in the deck that can try and punish, engines or board states that don't have a Manaphy established already. It's just a really, really good attack. There's also, in Japan, there's some Frostmoth decks that completely base their deck around Greninja, not just because it's an ability that's fantastic, but also because Moonlight Shuriken is just like a good attack on its own. So yeah, that's pretty funny. We could see some 1-prize attacking Frostmoth decks with like this card and some Laprases and stuff like that, which could be pretty hilarious. But yeah, I can't say enough about this card. It is absolutely bonkers. And in our opening games that we've played on tabletop already, it's like one of the first things you search for with Quick Ball in your openings, just to give you that extra little bit of push. And then it sits on board the entire game. It's going to be a great card. Radiant Pokemon do have this rule box, so it is worth noting that Path will shut them off. But it's still a great card to have sat around when you're getting hit with these Marnies, getting hit with these Roxannes. It just gives you that little bit of extra protection, that extra bit of draw in Inteleon decks is something very welcome as well. It's not only limited to basic energy, it can get rid of excess like double turbos and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, it ticks every single box. The card is completely bananas, so you need really good reason to play any other Radiant Pokemon.
Next up, we have Diancie. Diancie is one that we have chatted about here and there. Has a very interesting ability, Princess Curtain, that says as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, whenever your opponent plays a supporter card from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to your benched basic Pokemon. So, I don't think this is going to see massive amount of use in very typical decks, just because we're really moving towards a format where there's a lot of evolutions as attackers, V-Stars, that kind of thing. But it's fantastic for combo decks to basically just feed your opponent Diancie after Diancie, help build a hand up, help build a board up, being able to, primarily the one we've talked about the most in this video is that Origin Form Dialga, build up lots of energy on the board on basic Pokemon that can't be touched by your opponent's boss's orders, and then eventually succumb to this combo and really sort of overextend because of this Diancie and all the time you've had set up. That's kind of the idea. The other thing we've kind of toyed around with this is the more Pico Electro Wheel sort of hit and run deck, which is pretty cool because you can hit and run into one prizes fairly consistently and have your two prizes be protected from boss, whilst also building up late game swing attackers like Raichu V and stuff. So they're the two decks that we've primarily used it for. But realistically, it's not a bad engine in a lot of different decks. It protects some of your other sort of setup Pokemon, your Sobbles, your Mincenos and stuff early game. It's levelable, searchable, which is really nice. Naturally builds itself well into a lot of these decks that you want to be protected as well, which is nice. It's a really, really cool card. Like I say, it's not going to be used in everything. We'll talk about Thievel later on that is actually quite similar to this. Obviously, it's a stage 1, but it has a slightly different effect. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. Like I say, it's really good at helping protect some of your combo pieces here and there. Very strong ability. Not immediately splashable in everything, but there's definitely going to be decks that some decks that will play 4 that are really combo centric and just want you to basically have a board that is untouchable until you're ready to evolve into these stage 1s and V-Stars and that kind of thing and go off. And just as a 1 or 2 of, especially in the early turns, to try and help establish your board and get multiple Sobbles down and know that they are safe for a little while. It also has the Spike Draw attack for 1 colorless that does 20 and draws 2 cards as well, which is definitely nothing to sniff at because basically it just means that you don't have to just be sacking these and not even getting the benefits of attacking or whatever. Sometimes you may be running something like a Zacian with Intrepid Sword. It means Intrepid Swording turn 1 is actually viable for like control decks again now, which is pretty cool because you can spend a couple of turns trying to or sort of hiding behind the Diancie, and then by the time you run out of Diancies, you can use a way to get rid of the Zacian from your board, or you've built up enough of a combo to try and disrupt the opponent. This is a fantastic set for control, just as a side note, basically entirely because of Roxanne, because you have so much more comeback potential now, which is essentially something that control decks don't have right now. So yeah, very, very interesting implications for this Diancie. Difficult to say exactly where it's going to go in terms of its final placements, but one to seriously keep an eye out for because, could be very impactful for a variety of different decks.
Onto a Gallade. It's a stage 2 psychic type that has the Buddy Catch ability, allowing you to search your deck for a supporter, put it into your hand once per turn. I mean, it's not too bad. It's something that a stage 2 deck would definitely like to have. It also has the Helix Cutter attack for psychic and do colorless, moving an energy from this to one of your benched and doing 160 damage at the same time. Psychic typing is still pretty relevant for a number of fighting types out there, so could be good for that regard. I mean, there is that Mirage Step Curlier that can get all of your Curliers out, similar to the old Frogadier. So maybe this is helpful for the sort of Guardy Gallade deck, but this is still very rogue. The Buddy Catch is, a great effect, and it means that you could play things like Clara much more effectively. Things like Roxanne could be a great one-of in this sort of deck, and it might smooth out the curve of a deck like this, but I still don't feel like any of the attackers that the Gardevoir deck sort of represents is going to be strong enough, I don't think.
Similarly, Hisuian Typhlosion is another stage 2 that is just not going to be impactful enough. has the Supernatural Orb ability. You must discard a psychic energy from hand to use the ability, and it lets you burn and confuse the active Pokemon. Ironically, this is actually worse than Butterfree, which is something that makes it seem pretty bad, because Butterfree is only seeing real niche play here and there. Obviously, we mentioned Hisui and Sneasler earlier on that maybe drags it out of meme tier kicking and screaming, but it is a little bit more playable than this Hisui and Typhlosion. Obviously, this is reusable, but realistically, it's a stage 2 that you then have to commit more resources into to be able to use the ability. So yeah, really not strong enough overall, unfortunately.
We also have a Mesprit, speaking of not strong enough. We have the Mental Shroud ability. If you have Uxie Azelf in play, Pokemon have no weakness. It's 3 bench spaces. It's too much work. Dunsparce is awkward enough just for 1 bench space. Yeah, if we're getting terrorized by a super effective glasses deck that beats just everything, I think that's a way that Mesprit could see play. But obviously that's never happening.
So we have Togekiss. Togekiss is an interesting one. Lots of healing in this line. We actually have Togepi and Togetic, which have very similar abilities. Togepi, when you play it onto your board, you can heal 10 damage from your active Pokemon. Togetic, when you evolve Togepi, you get to heal 30 from your active. And then Togekiss lets you heal 90 from your active. So quite a lot of healing, to be honest. Especially when reused with Scoop Up Net, you can actually provide a lot of healing to your board. Realistically, across 2 turns, it's like, or across 3 turns, I guess it's 130, which isn't a huge amount, but in supplementary with some of these other healing options, could be quite big. But again, you don't really want to have to pack your tanky deck with one prize, like a 1 prize stage 2 line. It's not really ideal. Also breaks up the texture of you being like a tanky deck and trying to force your opponent, maybe even down an 8 prize route. Playing 1 prizes makes that far easier to navigate, because it really puts it opens up a lot of doors for them. So yeah, a lot of healing, but it's on a stage 2 and really doesn't help as much as it may seem in some of these tanking decks, especially when we have a variety of other healing options, some of which are as bad as Lucky Ice Pop and are still better than this.
We also have a Weirdeer. It's a stage 1 psychic type that has 140 hit points. It has the ability Hurried Gate. Once per turn, you can draw a card. Not too bad. And it also has the extra sensory attack. For 2 colorless, you do 40. And if you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent, this does 80 more damage. So actually, functionally, very similar to what we were saying about Yanmega, in that it's just another string to the Zoroark bow. Now, if you need to hit psychic type coverage, you can match hand sizes up fairly easily. You have the Weirdeer to help you fix hand math. You also have Sinnoh, of course, so lots of ways that a Zoroark deck can try and match up against the opponent, as well as some supporters that could help you get there as well. In order to hit that 120 that you could add that belt to, or the glasses to go over the top and hit some key weaknesses. So yeah, it's potentially a piece in the Zoroark deck. I don't think right now that psychic type coverage is worthwhile enough, but who knows, maybe things change. Weirdeer becomes an option.
So we have Hisui and Decidueye. Hisui and Decidueye is a fighting type that has the Piercing Claw attack for 30 damage for 0 energy, times the number of each damage counter on the opponent's active Pokemon. Realistically, the only place we can see this is in Decidueye-based decks already, which aren't really seeing any play at the moment. Admittedly, it's kind of a niche, like we've seen niche play of it over like the past year or so, but in general, it's pretty much vanished. It's a nice damage mod, especially given that Hisui and Decidueye does not do a particularly large amount of damage in general. That in combination with quick shooting really means that Piercing Claw can definitely be taking one-shots after an initial Spitting Arrow, even just with the supplementary damage from Spitting Arrow and quick shooting rather than the 90 that you're hitting into the active with. So it's actually a nice damage mod. The problem is the deck is just not great right now. I think it's a nice addition to the deck if you're playing the deck anyway, but naturally, it's not the strongest of edition of decks in general. Because of that just drags the card down in general.
Here is another Radiant Pokemon. It's Hawlucha. It's a fighting type with 90 hit points and 1 retreat cost. Its ability is Big Match. If this Pokemon is on your bench, your Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon V Max. So it's very limited in what its buff is, but it's a very sizable buff. 30 additional damage can be pushing some key breakpoints into 1-hit KOs. Now, we're only anticipating a few VMAXs to be all that powerful in the format. Really, it's just looking at things like Mew VMAX, possibly Ice Rider gets a breath of life from this Hawlucha itself, but also from Palkia, and possibly there are some other ones that Arceus can be powering up, I guess. Those are the sort of key ones that we're thinking about. So really, you're trying to target specific matchups with this Hawlucha, unlike the Greninja, which is like universally insane because card draw is insane. But the Hawlucha has to really hone in and think about some decks that you could be playing that really need that specific 30 additional damage to reach on VMAX Pokemon. And I think Ice Rider is going to be a great example of this, where that Max Lance gets to 250. Then you can belt up, then you can big match, and you can get to 310. That allows you to knock out a Mew, of course, and with things like Inteleon plus Temple of Sinnoh now, you could even get a knockout through an Oricorio, or you could once again Leon. So it's a lot of buffs stacking up all at once, but it helps you reach a key knockout. Something like Whimsicott V-Star, Trick Wind, thanks to the reduction of damage of Double Turbo, it has to 3-hit KO certain VMAXs, but having a Hawlucha down means that Trick Wind is getting back into a 2-hit KO into VMAXs. A lot more pressure, which I think is going to be really important for a deck like that. And Shaman V-Star, it's a late game bomb, of course, but it gets even more dangerous with the help of a plus 30. That Revenge Blast really does get pretty spicy into 2 prizes even faster in the game, and late game it becomes a huge threat. So the Hawlucha is going to have to pick its moments. It's basically always in Greninja's shadow because of how insane that ability is. We just really have to drive home that fact. But if decks are make or break on a single matchup, like you're currently losing to a VMAX and then playing a Hawlucha means that you can get 1-hit KOs and up trade on them, or trade evenly with them, could swing it back in your favor. That's where the Hawlucha has to come in and really fix some numbers for you. It's, again, one of those sort of metagame decisions where you think if a VMAX deck is popular enough that you need to play this in the first place. These are the reasons why we're putting Hawlucha a little bit lower than the community right now. But really, that's just because we love Greninja.
So we have Absol. Absol is an interesting one. It has the Sweeping Calamity attack for 1 Dark Energy that does 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Doesn't seem particularly impactful, but when paired with, knowing the attack text of Hisuian Samurott V-Star, you can see maybe why you would look towards this 1 prize option. And then Claw Rend for 2 energy does 50, plus 70 if they already have damage counters on them. This can actually one-shot a Mew VMAX, which is pretty impressive. Obviously, they knocked through Oricorio, worth noting, but an Oricorio-less Mew VMAX can be one-shot by an Absol because you've done 10 with the Sweeping Calamity. You then do Claw Rend for 120, plus a Choice Belt does 150 times 2 is 300, plus the 10 from Calamity is 310. So it's a nice one-off option, perhaps. 1 prize option in the Dark decks. The problem is primarily Galarian Moltres is almost always a better 1 prize option. So right now it really is in Galarian Moltres' shadow, and it's just considerably worse. We still have a fair few ways of being able to deal this 1 damage, but definitely want to keep in mind, especially when we lose things like Galarian Zigzagoon, may be worth trying out later down the line. Also an interesting one-off Dark-type Pokemon that can help with Miltank early game. Obviously, we haven't talked about Miltank yet, but it's essentially a safeguarder. Can help with Miltank early game before Moltres is live, perhaps, against like quad Miltank decks here and there. But again, we're not expecting them to be super prevalent to the point where you have to always be playing this. Could just be one to pick up one of and keep in mind as a tech should you ever need it.
We have a Stage 2 Hisuian Samurott. It's a Dark type with 170 hit points and 2 retreat cost. It has the Wily Stance ability, allowing you to discard 1 from hand to draw 3 cards. It's a spiritual reprint to Swampert with power draw. The Samurott also has a Dark Mastery attack. For Dark and 2 colorless, you do 60 plus 20 more for each energy attached to all of your Pokemon. The funky thing about Hisuian Samurott, despite being a Dark type, is that your Oshawott is actually a Water type, and that could be an avenue for this deck to see some experimentation here or there, because Irida could actually help you get Oshawott early on, and could also help you get things like rare candies on future turns. So maybe there's a small avenue for Samurott to actually get rolling, because of course a discard 1, draw 3 is very strong. But I think we just have so much other great draw in the format. We have a Radiant Greninja in essentially every deck, which, although it's only for energy cards, it's a great way to dig deeper. We have the Inteleon cherry picking. We have Make Do on a stage 1 with that Mincino that has such great early game potential for us to get our Pokemon rolling, and we have the big barrel, which is just oftentimes only taking up only 2 or 4 spaces in your deck, and it's doing plenty for you. That's kind of the issue here. Samurot's just having to compete with such great other Pokemon in the game right now that it's just not really going to get a look in. But I thought it was worth noting the Irida thing, because if Irida is as insane as we think, we can really try and push the boat out and maybe even make this engine work.
So we have Mightyena, a really interesting one. Mightyena is essentially Zoroark's new best friend, has the Hustle Bark ability that says if your opponent has any Pokemon VMAX in play, this Pokemon's attack cost is 3 colorless less. And would you look at it, Mightyena's attack cost is currently 3 colorless. It does 160 damage, and Mightyena does 50 damage to itself. First and foremost, the 50 damage to itself is basically irrelevant because it's almost always going to be getting knocked out anyway because you're only a 110 HP Pokemon. 160 is a brilliant number into Mew VMAX because that's with weakness, that's 320, that's KOing a VMAX. Again, admittedly not through Oricorio, but we have Choice Belt to be able to really just hit it home and know that you're getting the KO. It's a stage 1, so it naturally fits into the Zoroark deck, which is pretty cool, along with all of these other various one or two of stage 1 Pokemon that we've seen this deck be built around before. Admittedly, the Zorobox deck that we built very early into the Brilliant Stars meta already had a very strong Mew matchup, but this is kind of really, again, hammering it home, making sure it's very good. Plus also means that the Zoro box deck can be condensed down into a Zoroark package and put into other decks maybe to try and give other decks more of a fighting chance against Mew. So yeah, definitely opens up the avenues for Zoroark. Zoroark was great at dealing with Meloetters anyway, so Zoroark plus Mightyena gives a really good package against the majority of attackers in Mew decks, which is great. Again, it means that maybe this Zorobox deck that already had a great Mew matchup can now be fit into other decks that maybe don't have a great Mew matchup. So that's definitely worth thinking about. But in general, Zorobox looks to be picking up some really, really interesting and cool additions. It was already a deck that I think Joe and I were very, very enthusiastic about how much fun it was. And again, its matchup into certain different decks and certain different archetypes in the format, and it really feels like we're beginning to piece this together, and towards the end of this format this actually could be a legitimate deck and have a variety of different options. You can still see all of the other options. You can naturally play in a thin Zoroark deck that might help introduce more consistency or whatever to different archetypes, Eldegoss for energy, but barrel for drawing cards, that kind of thing, or even just additional attackers. So maybe moving away from Zoroark as a purely attacking deck and just as an addition, a supplementary package to other decks could be where we see this go. But yeah, very interesting for sure.
We've got that Feeble with the Befuddle ability, which is really the selling point of this card. It's stage 1, of course, and you have, if your opponent has 2 or fewer prize cards remaining, supporter cards played from your opponent's hand have no effect on your benched Pokemon V. Essentially, it's a pretty simple deal here where you try and get the Feeble out, and your opponent has already knocked out a couple 2-prize Pokemon. They're just a boss's orders away from game. You're more than 1 attack away from winning yourself. The Feeble means that you can try and force a couple 1 prizes at them instead to give yourself that additional turn to close out the game. And I do think that a Moltres deck certainly could be working. That's potentially with a small Darkrai package. That's potentially with a small Feeble package as well, because this isn't the only Feeble in Standard. We also have the Fumbling Hands Feeble, which is essentially like a Let Loose style effect, where you when you evolve, both players shuffle their hand to the bottom and draw 4 cards. So it's like a Marnie effect as well, I guess, but it's a coming into play effect. So I could easily see a 2-1-1 Feeble package in a Moltres deck, and it means that you force essentially an extra turn out of the player. And what's better than having a Galarian Moltres as your late game beat stick, whilst you can have that Crobat down, that Luminion down, those early game cards you use to get set up in the game, but they're not that huge detriment, that downside that you always see them as, where your opponent just goes, yeah, I got the boss, GG. Now the Feeble says, no, you're having to go through 1 Moltres with that Malevolent Charge Fiery Wrath combo this turn, and you're going to have to do it again next turn if you actually want to win the game. And sometimes that's going to be enough for you to outrace the opponent, especially because this Moltres V gets so much more aggressive in the format, where you're able to Aura Burn turn 1, going second we can easily have a pure Moltres deck where you go Moltres the first turn, Moltres the next turn, then you're going for the double baby Moltres plan from then on. And the Befuddled could be the piece of the puzzle that you need so that they can't simply gust around your early game threats, or even if you have additional Moltres like lying around or whatever. So yeah, pretty spicy card. It does take up a good amount of space, but I do think that this ability really does change, again, how the opponent wins the game and makes their prize map that much more difficult. And if you can staple a little bit of hand disruption in here as well with Thievul, why not? You know, you could easily be playing a couple scoop up nets if you're going to be playing like a Mew package or something for your early game pivot. Helps you get ball search and patches and stuff rolling in those opening stages. You've already got Radiant Greninja. That's a card that loves scoop up net. Why not play this 2/1/1 Thievul and see if it works out for you?
Next up, we have Hisuian Sneasler, a 120 HP stage 1 Pokemon that has the Carrying Climb ability. As long as this Pokemon is on your bench, your active Pokemon's retreat cost is 2 less. We've seen this on a variety of different stage 1 Pokemon in the past, Beware the most recently, but also things like Dodrio and stuff. A couple of them have seen niche play, but this one does not seem particularly strong right now. We have plenty of ways of moving. We still have Scoop Up Net, which is arguably the best sort of switching option we've ever had in terms of basic Pokemon, one prize Pokemon in terms of picking them up and stuff. So yeah, there's no need for extra switching options right now. There's it feels like things like Switch and stuff are going to be universal forever. So you need to have a format with a seriously low amount of switching outs for this to be a tech ever in your deck.
Next up, we have Bishop. It's a really interesting stage 1 that we mentioned when talking about that Gatejawborg Stadium. That seems to be the combo that is being fed to us here, because the Revenge Slash is the thing of note on the Bishop. For just 1 metal energy, you do 30 plus 30 more for each damage counter on your benched Pawniard. And thanks to Gatejawborg doing 2 counters on each Pawniard, this Revenge Slash, if all 4 of your Pawniards are in play and damaged thanks to the Bog, you can hit 270 for just 1 attachment. Now you're obviously thinking, how do you get this rolling? If all 4 Pawniards are in play, how's Bishop around? It's thanks to the lovely Zoroark card, so you're going to play that thick Zoroark line, 2 to 3 Bishops probably, and then your 4 Pawniards. You've got that heavy ball to pick Pawniards out of the prizes, which I think is huge. You've got a couple ways you can try and find the Gatejawborg. I think that's the thing that me and Jack are still a little bit sus of, that your deck doesn't really get going. You have things trapped in your hand if you don't have access to the Gatejawborg in time. But hopefully with some of the speedy cards we get, like Trekking Boots from this set, maybe combining that with Rotom gives you extra dig potential to find this Gatejawborg earlier on in the game. And another thing to note is, of course, if you're not physically evolving into Pawniards into Bishops, you don't actually need the Pawniards on turn 1. You actually just need to find the Zaruas in the early turns, and they don't need to be damaged at all. You just need to turn them into Bishops later down the line. So, going to be a really interesting engine. I think it's a fantastic build around. Obviously, there's precedent of an attack like this doing very well. And 270, man, what a crazy number. You're able to belt up and get into that 300 threshold for just 1 energy. It's so tempting that I really have to give it a go. And I feel like similar to like the Rapid Mally and stuff like that, where you're jumping through hoops, but the damage is just good enough that it's probably worth your time. And yeah, the sort of 300 mark with the choice belt is able to knock out basically everything that isn't a VMAX. And because you're already playing a Zoro package, you can play that Mighty Enna to actually get KOs on Mew even as well. So yeah, I think it's going to be an awesome deck. I'm super tempted to build around this, and yeah, it's going to be a great puzzle to figure out. But I think its inconsistencies at finding the stadium will keep it in sort of the mid-tier and probably won't push into tier 1, maybe not even as high as tier 2, but it's a great 1-prize deck to have in the mix.
Next up, we have Magnezone. Magnezone is very similar to Blastoise of old, that has a Giga Magnet ability. Once you're in your turn, you may look at the top 6 cards of your deck, choose any number of metal energy you find, attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like, and shuffle the remaining cards back into your deck. So obviously you can see the synergy with, say, Origin Dialga, trying to have... This is another way of trying to build a deck to quickly access Metal Blast and Chrono Star. Again, it's a stage 2, which is a bit awkward. Admittedly, it's reusable Metal Energy Acceleration. It does get worse and worse as the game goes on, unfortunately. It really feels like if you're building around this, that's where you're going to be using that Adamant supporter that we talked about oh so long ago in terms of combo pieces, trying to find sort of Candy Magnezone or whatever early turns. to get the Magnezone out and start using Giga Magnet. But we still think in general, just having a Zacian and Diancie engine looks to be, while still pretty inconsistent, more consistent than the Stage 2 version of Magnezone plus Adaman. But yeah, another way to build Dialga for sure, and definitely one to try out if you are determined on taking 2 turns.
Onto the colourless stuff, we have Hoot Hoot. It's a 50 hit point basic that just has that little ability, Lookout. As long as this Pokemon is in play, basic energy attached to your benched Pokemon can't be discarded by effects of your opponent's items and supporters. So it's a little bit of way to protect yourself against Crushing Hammer, which, as we know, is one of the most frustrating things in the TCG. It's only to your bench, which is a little bit of an off-putting thing here, but it can be just a way to stop you getting cheesed in those opening turns by Crushing Hammers. It's probably not worth the tech space. Crushing Hammer is only seeing play in exactly Whimsicott right now. I don't think there's anything else going for it. And we're actually coming into a format where we have a ton of energy flood-style decks, which makes Crushing Hammer like pretty useless, right? When everyone's able to Dark Patch their way through you, use Palkia to get around you anyway. There's so many ways to Burst Accelerate, even Gardenia as well, another one. Burst Acceleration is a great counter to Hammer naturally in the format because they're not worried about one energy getting lost here or there. So yeah, I don't think Hammer is going to really have a stranglehold on the format by any means, so I don't think there's going to be much reason to play this Hoot Hoot, but it's a nice card to have in mind if you're getting tilted by Hammerheads.
So we have Miltank. Miltank is a pretty impressive card. I mentioned it earlier on. It's essentially the new safeguarder of the format. Miraculous Body. It says prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon V. So that's Vs, V-Stars, V-Maxes, all of those different Pokemon Miltank is immune to. This could be a really good way to sort of slow the game down, really change the pace of the game, especially in combination with something like a Roxanne to try and buy yourself a turn, get yourself a bit of a breather. It's even got a decent attack. Kickabout does 10 plus 20 for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon for 2 energy. So realistically, with a double turbo, this is probably doing like 70 to 90 damage, but even that could just be a nice enough poke to be able to then close out the game next turn. Essentially, that's one really nice way of being able to play Miltank, just as a one prize, sort of change the texture of the game, slow the game down, combine it with something like a Roxanne, and really try and just buy yourself a turn of breathing room. But also, you could play like a quad Miltank deck, similar to how sort of quad Hooper used to work, but this time having a bit more of an attacking presence. We have Sharon's Care plus Cape of Toughness to make these kind of difficult to deal with. We also have Blissey V, which is another big tanky Pokemon that admittedly doesn't present any immunity, but is just a lot of HP to be able to get through for your opponent to deal with. As well as things like Eldegoss to just reuse things like Sharon's Care and that kind of thing. Admittedly, there's still a fair few number of outs to Miltank. A lot of Inteleons can deal with it, especially without a Cape of Toughness. Similarly, Mew has naturally inbuilt wall breaking. And realistically, a lot of, there's a fair few one prize attackers that can naturally be fit into almost every deck right now. But we still think Miltank is going to be enough to change the plane of the game, that it's deserving of that 4-star. We still think there will be people that try and sort of relive the times of old of playing attacking Hooper and that kind of thing, as well as it just being a nice natural one-of if you are looking for a one-off Pokemon, primarily I think in Arceus decks, to be honest. Some of these 2-prize Arceus decks that aren't building around Inteleon or Moltres, which admittedly is a niche few, but something like Arceus Lycanroc or Arceus Corviknight or something like that, that maybe doesn't end up using any of these other one-prize options could perhaps have space for a one-off Miltank to, again, slow the pace of play down, really try and slow things down, combine it with a Roxanne, and hope that that's enough time for you to be able to close out the game the following turn.
And finally, we have the Reggie gang. There's actually a few new Reggies all in this set, but Gigas is really the sort of build around, so that's why we've left it until now. It really makes sense to talk about them all in one because they are a package deal, as you'll see now from the ability Ancient Wisdom. Once during a turn, if you have Regirock, Registeel, Regice, Regieleki, and Regidrago in play, you may search your discard pile for up to 3 energy cards and attach them to one of your Pokemon. So your board has to be full of Regis, one of each, but it means you can get some crazy energy acceleration, actually. And despite having a 5 energy attack cost, this can be powered up all in a turn, via the Ancient Wisdom text here, because it's, of course, special energy and basic energy. So you can grab some twin energies here and go all the way into Giganto Break, which does 150 base, and if the opponent's active is a VMAX, 150 more damage. So with Choice Belt, potentially even with powerful colorless energy, you could one-hit KO some VMAXs via this Regigigas, which is absolutely insane. We only think there's going to be a couple of VMAXs relevant in the format right now, but it is going to have a good time against those. Against everything else, the Ancient Wisdom is going to be the engine for your other attacking threats. So I think some of the best attackers is going to be the Regielekis that we get. We already have one in the format with Terra Spark. The reason why I like this one is that it can hit for weakness onto Palkia V-Star, which we think is very strong. So being able to Giganto Break KO Mew and being able to Terra Spark KO Palkia may make this rogue deck like just worth experimenting with enough, because you could in theory have a couple of reasonable matchups, which is kind of funny. Terra Spark with like a belt is doing enough to knock out Palkias, whilst also putting damage onto two of their benched, maybe peppering up a following Palkia or putting some pressure on like Sobbles and whatnot. That could be interesting. The new Regieleki is a 120 damage snipe as well. All of these painful discards, you don't really care about it because the following turn you can just Ancient Wisdom again. I think the idea is we're always going to be like constantly reloading our next Regi, whatever we attack with, expecting one to get knocked out. Again, we have a Regidrago already that can do, I believe it's 240 for like grass, fire. But there is a new Regidrago as well from this set that has Dragon's Treasure. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is your active, you may draw until you have 4 cards in hand. A little bit awkward, has to be active, it's only 4 cards. It's not ideal. But we've seen how successful like Barrel has been, and we can try and do stuff like this when we have pivoting options. Maybe, unfortunately, Balloon is not fantastic here, but look to play like Nets maybe, so you can sort of fix your board state in certain instances. It's also a great way, if you play Scoop Up Net, it's actually a way around, just all sorts of different disruptions. So I like playing this Regidrago. It lets you switch out your attackers here and there when needed and get a little bit of extra draw. Its own attack can do 160 for Grass, Fire, Colorless. All of these awkward attack costs are going to be fine because you're going to play for Aurora Energy and just keep reloading those when you can. And then the 3 on the bottom, the Regi, Steel, Ice, and Rock, are all from this set. They all have the same attack, Regi Gate, allowing you to search your deck for a basic Pokemon and put it onto the bench. Great for a deck like this, where you're going to end up playing like 2 and 3 counts of all of these different Regis. The Regi Steel can do 220, minus 50 for each colorless in your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost, so it's hoping to get decent damage there. And the metal typing, I guess, is reasonable into Ice Rider. Reg Ice is doing 100 for water colorless, and if they're a V, they can't attack, but it's pretty easy to get around that effect anyway, unfortunately. But the Regirock could also have some interesting typing as well. Giga Impact doing 140, again, can ×2 into Arceus players, so at least forces that Dunsparce down. Maybe you could even Regieleki through Dunsparce and then be Giga Impacting late game. So a couple of interesting type coverages you can represent. You're an annoying one-prize deck. The engine is going to be really weird. You have Stormy Mountains to help get Eleki and Drago down. You can play a number of Capture Energies, because of course you can keep reloading those with Wisdom as well. It doesn't matter that they're colorless in a lot of instances here, especially if you're attacking with Gigas a ton. You have Hisuian Heavy Ball, so even your thin lines aren't going to be too much of an issue. I think the biggest issue is that, you know, if you've like prized one and one gets KO'd, you need to reload it all in that turn, so you're probably going to have to play some annoying cards like Rods, maybe even Clara. Even if you're not playing many basic energy, it could be a play that you go for. But yeah, it's a really wacky engine. It's going to be a ton of fun. I know Mahone's already played this, and it looks to be a fun archetype if nothing else. So play around with it in League, but I don't think it's going to hit the heights. The one thing of interest is that if Mew is like exceptionally good and Palkia is exceptionally good, this deck actually has like good placement in the meta. But that's what it needs to actually succeed, because it's going to be a bit of a pile.
And that's the summary. Make sure you pause here if you want to take a look at all of our one prize scores. It's a really impactful set. As you can see, we also have the trainer gallery cards coming back. Pre-releases took place this weekend and are going to be next weekend, and then the set drops just under 2 weeks from now, which is really exciting. So make sure you pick up some packs. There's a lot of really impactful cards competitively, but also just look at some of these fantastic trainer gallery cards that seem to still be as common as ever. So there's definitely something for collectors, players, everyone. Really exciting stuff. Very impactful for players. Like I say, I think this is almost, if not maybe even more impactful than Brilliant Stars. And Brilliant Stars had Arceus, which is basically completely change the game. So this is sure to be a very, very exciting set, definitely.
Yeah, we've already started our tabletop testing. Myself and Jack are going to carry on doing that for the next couple of weeks until we get these cards on PTCGO, so keep an eye out for the stream. There's going to be more reviews of this set in terms of looking at alternate formats like GLC, Cube, and I'll try and get an expanded look for this set as well, because there are tons of cards that impact all of those situations. Even cards not on this review might make it onto some of the others, so stay tuned for those. We're going to get some deck analysis going as well, so tons of content coming on the channel. You've been absolute stars for listening for all this time. It's been a really long one, but we will see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.